Chapter 977. In the starry sky, the demon slayer battle ended and the divine restriction dissipated. Knowing Destiny's sword intent also dissipated and couldn't be sensed anymore. The swordsman kept his sword and left his last glory in the world forever. In the distant battlefield, the moment the demon slayer battle ended, a majestic sword intent rose around the Dawn Moon Tower Master, shocking the world and shocking the world. The sword intent changed hands, and from then on, the swordsman sealed his sword and the Dawn Moon Tower appeared. In the battlefield, the 9 Yama Kings felt the familiar and powerful sword intent from the Dawn Moon Tower Master and were shocked. What's going on? What happened? Sword technique, Tai. The waning Moon House mistress gathered her chi with her fingers. Suddenly, a surge of sword will shot into the sky between heaven and earth. The Tai sword appeared, causing the entire starry sky to shake. In the next moment, Miao Yuzong couldn't react in time and was quickly swallowed by the dazzling sword light. His flesh cracked and his blood dyed the starry sky red. It was a shocking scene. Not only the 3 sects, even the Yama Kings of the underworld couldn't recover from the shock. They couldn't understand what happened. On the other side, Mu Qingxue looked at the silhouette in the divine restriction in the distance, and his beautiful eyes dimmed. His sword disappeared. In the divine restriction, Ningchen turned around and waved his hand to disperse the divine restriction that was almost destroyed. He walked forward step by step. Knowing Destiny Marquis. Looking at the young figure in front of them, the Starlight Sect and Moon Sect's faces were filled with hatred. They were distracted for a moment and their sword light flashed, bringing out a waterfall of blood. "Kill him," Ningchen said calmly. In the battlefield, the 9 Yama Kings nodded and attacked even more fiercely. They were like a storm to kill the last demon. After Miao Yu died, the Dawn Moon Tower Master stopped and walked forward. Looking at the figure in front of her, she said, "Knowing Destiny, see you later." "See you later." Ningchen nodded and replied, "Thank you for your help this time, Tower Master." "It's a fair deal. Brother Ning, you don't have to thank me." The Dawn Moon Brothel's master replied and left without saying anything else. In the battle, the 9 Yama Kings joined forces, the female supreme and Wu Qingying assisted them. The battle was one-sided. Although the 2 sects were strong, they gradually found it difficult to withstand the attacks of so many experts. In the distance, Mu Qingxue's figure flashed and came to his side. He handed over the holy glory and said softly, "I'll have to trouble you again." Ningchen took the demonic palace's sacred artifact. Phoenix flames rose from his body as he refined it again. In the battle ahead, sword light and demonic energy crisscrossed, and blood splattered everywhere. The demonic calamity that had plagued many regions was finally resolved today. Sword light streaked past, sealing their throats and taking their lives. With one last glance, the 2 sects looked at the plain-clothed young man in the distance with unwillingness. Their hatred was still hard to dispel. "Let's go. It's over. We should go back." After the battle ended, Ningchen said softly and walked forward. In the starry sky, the Yama Kings of the 9 halls nodded in unison. They didn't say anything else as they followed along. They had done everything they could to deal with the demonic calamity. The remaining matters would be left to the various regions to deal with. In the starry sky that was riddled with holes, the people of the underworld left. It was like the end of an era. Gradually they disappeared. A few days later, in the Red Luan, All Heavens, Ziwei, Spirit Void, and other regions, countless sects gradually discovered the abnormality of the demonic palace's army. The Saint of the Demonic Palace and the 3 Sins sect that had been pressing down on them like 4 mountains seemed to have disappeared. From the initial suspicion to the later confirmation, the sects were all overjoyed and fought back crazily. In an instant, the flames of war were everywhere in the major regions. Without their strongest cultivators, the demonic palace's army was defeated again and again. They had no chance to fight back. In the Ziwei Galaxy, in the underworld's 10 halls, in front of the King Yenlua's palace, Ningchen stood there quietly, looking at who was learning swordsmanship from Mu Qingxue. His face was calm and peaceful. Not far away, Jian walked over. Looking at the figure in front of the King Yenlua's palace, he said, Ji Ming, I have something to tell you. Ning Chen turned around and looked at the man beside him. What is it? The matter here is over. I would like to return to the divine land. Jian Er said with a nostalgic expression. Ning Chen nodded. It's my duty. We'll meet again. We'll meet again. The final farewell was simple and calm. With that, Jian Er did not waste any more time. His figure flashed and he flew out of the underworld. In front of him, Mu Qingxue looked back. Looking at the figure in front of the King Yanluo's palace, he said, Senior brother has left? Ning Chen nodded. He has returned to the divine land. Hearing this, Mu Qingxue nodded slightly and did not ask any more questions. Over the years, they had been through too many troubles and did not have time to go back. Now that the matter was over, it was indeed time to go back. Master's wife, I've finished practicing. After practicing for a long time, put away her sword and ran forward. Mu Qingxue came back to his senses and nodded. Go and play. Don't run too far. Hearing this, Er's face lit up. She disappeared in a flash. You still can't pick up your sword? Mu Qingxue walked forward and asked. Ning Chen shook his head and said, Without the sword bone, it is almost impossible to cultivate back to the original upper Dao of the sword. The price of this transaction is too high. Mu Qingxue sighed softly. Although the price is high, it is worth it. Ning Chen smiled and said, If I can never pick up a sword again in this life, it is not unacceptable to exchange for peace in the inner world. The inner world was the place where his life began. There were too many people and memories that he cherished. He could not let it be destroyed by the flames of war. I will keep my promise and help you find your sword, no matter how long it takes. Mu Qingxue looked over and said softly to the man beside him. Ning Chen smiled and said, Qingxue, you don't have to be so stubborn. The situation is already very good. Perhaps I don't need to pick up a sword again in this life. There is no need to work so hard to cultivate it back. Mu Qingxue fell silent. A swordsman could not pick up a sword. The bitterness of not being able to pick up a sword was not as simple as what he said. Alright, how is AI Ran going to rebuild the Buddhist kingdom? Ning Chen looked into the distance and asked. The Buddhist kingdom was affected the most by the chaos of the demon palace. AI Ran has tried her best to find the disciples of the Buddhist kingdom. However, there is still a long way to go to rebuild the Buddhist kingdom. Mu Qingxue said softly. There is nothing in this world that is difficult for those who set their mind to it. Ning Chen smiled and said, Rebuilding the Buddhist kingdom is a great merit. As long as AI Ran succeeds, it will be very beneficial for her to reach the fourth realm in the future. She is the Buddhist daughter. She is the most suitable person to do this. You have arranged everyone's path. Have you not thought about your own future? Mu Qingxue sighed softly. Future. Hearing this word, Ning Chen's eyes lit up and said, Indeed, I have not thought about it. I still have one more thing to do. Only when this matter is finished can I truly be at ease. The ghost girl? Mu Qingxue asked softly. Ning Chen replied softly and said, When the ghost girl was revived, her situation was not normal. I have been searching for her all these years. However, I have not found anything. The Immortal Corpses Patrol is mysterious. Now that the ghost girl has been taken away by the Immortal Corpses, it will not be easy to find her. Mu Qingxue said, Where there is a will, there is a way. All these years, which of the things we have done have been easy? After speaking, Ning Chen looked towards the main hall not far away and said, All right, I'll go check on Senior Sister Dai. Her Majesty is trying to think of a way to dispel her unnecessary memories. I'll go and see if there's anything I can help with. In front of the Imperial Palace, Mu Qingxue looked at the back of Yi Chen as he left. A hint of emotion flashed across his beautiful face. Yi Chen's strength and wisdom made everyone unconsciously rely on him. Unknowingly, this brought him more pressure. He hoped that everything would end here and there would not be any new disturbances. Not far away from the Imperial Palace, a faint brilliance rose up and filled the entire palace. An aura that made people's hearts palpitate circulated. It was so oppressive that it made people unable to breathe. Ningchen walked in and looked at the female supreme who was erasing Butterfly's memories. His expression turned serious. The 9 Serenities heaven-devouring demon scripture was the #1 demonic technique in the world. Although it was very powerful, its weakness was very obvious. When the user devoured other people's origin, they would also be affected by other people's memories. In the long run, it was very likely that they would lose themselves. Senior Sister Dai's memories had been erased by the saint of the demon palace. Being affected by other people's memories would be very serious. Therefore, the best way was to erase all of these memories and then find a way to restore Senior Sister Dai's memories. In the palace, the female supreme's body emitted a faint light. The 9 Serenities demonic technique combined with the soul-searching technique forcefully erased the chaotic memories in Butterfly's consciousness. Time slowly passed. After about half an hour, the female supreme stopped and let out a sigh of relief. She looked at the young man who was waiting in the palace and said, "Don't worry, she is fine." Hearing this, Ning Chen's anxious heart was slightly relieved. He said seriously, "Thank you, female supreme. It is what I should do." The female supreme shook her head and said, "There are too many memory fragments in Butterfly's body. It will take some time to erase them all. Don't be impatient." Ning Chen nodded and said, "I will have to trouble female supreme. If you need my help, just let me know." "I don't need it for now." The female supreme replied. Before she could finish, an earth-shattering tremor resounded between heaven and earth. It was so terrifying that the entire underworld continent shook violently. Almost at the same time, the huge stars in the major star fields shook. A few stars couldn't bear the terrifying impact and deviated from their orbits, crashing into other huge stars. An indescribably terrifying disaster instantly affected the major star fields. In just a blink of an eye, countless living beings were killed or injured. In the palace, feeling the shocking tremor, Ning Chen turned around and walked to the front of the palace. He looked at the distant starry sky and frowned slightly. What happened this time? Not far away, Mu Qingshue's figure flashed and came to the front of the palace. He said, "I will go and take a look." "Let's go together." Ning Chen replied and walked towards the outside of the divine forbidden ground. Beside him, Mu Qingxue followed and walked out of the underworld together. In the distant starry sky, in the red phoenix star field, a huge crack opened in the fog of the star field. Terrifying figures walked out one after another. There were more than 10 of them. Their cultivation was not below the demon masters. Their auras were so terrifying that it made people tremble. After countless years, the source of the disaster that was sealed by the Queen Mother of the West came to the world again. It was the real apocalypse. The entire starry sky cried out in sorrow. Chapter 978. In the Red Phoenix Galaxy, at the end of the collapsed Western Celestial Realm, a huge spatial crack appeared. A dozen figures with terrifying auras walked out. As soon as they appeared, heaven and earth wailed, and the starry sky shook violently. In front of the spatial crack, Di Mingtian, who was dressed in silver, stood quietly. He looked at the figures walking out in front of him. His calm expression revealed the majesty of a superior. "Your Highness." The royal family cultivators bowed and greeted respectfully. "Where's father? He didn't come?" Di Mingtian looked at the leader of the group, a man in purple, and asked. "Your Highness, the king asked us to leave first. After dealing with the matters at hand, he will come," the man in purple replied respectfully. "Are those people from the divine capital mountain restless again?" Di Mingtian frowned. The man in purple nodded and said, "The divine capital mountain has always been at odds with our clan. This time, the king wants to deal with his worries before coming here." Di Mingtian had heard this before. He nodded slightly and said, "That's fine too." "Your Highness, how strong are the cultivators in this realm? Are there any kings?" the man in purple asked. Di Mingtian shook his head and said, "No. The only fourth realm cultivator died in battle. So, your mission is very clear. Before the other major clans react, try your best to occupy as much land and resources as possible for our clan." "Yes, Your Highness," the man in purple said respectfully. While the Red Luan Star Zone was undergoing great changes, the experts of the True Realm and above in the various star zones all sensed a distant pressure from the depths of their souls, causing them to pale in fear. Fourth Realm cultivators, and there was more than one. How could this be? Outside the underworld in Ziwei, Ningchen looked into the distance. He also felt the abnormally powerful auras, and his expression darkened. So many Fourth Realm cultivators appeared at once. What happened? Knowing destiny. Below, the Yama Kings flew out and asked seriously, "What's going on?" "I'm not sure." Ningchen shook his head and said, "I'm afraid a great disaster is about to happen." "Indeed, one wave after another," Yizichen said. Nu Chang's expression turned serious. "Where did the auras of so many Fourth Realm cultivators come from?" "Stay here. I'll go back to the inner realm," Ningchen said seriously. Ningchen said in a serious tone. He didn't delay any longer and rushed toward the inner realm. At the same time, on the altar in the Reverence Moon Clan's ancient land, the phoenix body looked at the shaking sky with a solemn expression. It was truly an eventful time. The demonic calamity had just ended, and an even greater calamity had appeared. High Priest. Below the altar, the members of the Moon Worship Clan looked worried. They had never seen such a shocking earthquake before. Without a doubt, something big was about to happen in the human world. "I'll go take a look." On the altar, the phoenix body calmly spoke. The phoenix spread its wings and soared into the sky. In the inner realm, the 5 regions floated up and down. The vast and boundless land nourished this small world created by the gods. In the divine prefecture of the eastern region, a new barren city was built on the barren city that had been destroyed in the divine tribulation. On this day, the swordsman in white walked over. His sword will was restrained. He had returned after 100 years. Second senior brother. Jian-san, who had been standing guard in Desolate City, cried out involuntarily when he saw the newcomer. "Take a picture." Jian-er stepped forward and looked at his junior brother who had changed both in terms of aura and appearance. He sighed with emotion. Beside the sword pool, there were 2 eye-catching tombstones. One was the sword of Desolate City, and the other was the most outstanding disciple of Desolate City. After 100 years, many people still remembered the peerless demeanor of the swordsman in the past. "Master!" Jian-er silently knelt in front of Mu Bai's tomb. He had been proud all his life, but at this moment, he couldn't help but cry. He had been obsessed with the sword all his life. However, the sword was emotionless, but people were sentimental. The great calamity of the divine prefecture had brought too many disasters. Many things had become regrets. The cold night was bleak, and the autumn wind was bleak. The white-robed man kneeling under the moonlight was just like the master and disciple who shocked the world 100 years ago. Their white robes were whiter than snow, stunning the world. At this moment, above the 5 regions, an extremely powerful pressure swept down without warning. It was so terrifying that it made people's hearts tremble. In the 5 regions, the Xiantian and Ascending Immortals felt it. Their bodies trembled as they looked at the sky. Their hearts were in turmoil. It was as if the gods had descended from the sky. The aura of the gray-robed old man was extremely powerful. It surpassed the limits of the human world and reached the legendary 4th level. Tianqiong. The gray-robed old man looked to the east and murmured. Although it had been a long time, he could still feel the strong resentment left behind by Tianqiong before he died. He never thought that a mission would cause Tianqiong to stay in the King of Hell's Pure Land forever. The gray-robed old man didn't stop at all. He directly rushed to the divine land in the east. His speed was beyond imagination. "Is it finally my turn?" In the Desolation City, Jian-er felt the terrifying aura coming from the distance. His expression didn't change much. A person's life was long and short. As long as he had no regrets, it was enough. His master, senior brother, and knowing destiny had all done what they could. This time, it was his turn to protect this pure land. In the divine prefecture, the gray-robed figure flashed by. The terrifying pressure split mountains and rocks. The undisguised terrifying aura swept up waves of dust. Houses collapsed, mountains collapsed, and the earth cracked. The foreign races from other realms didn't care about the life and death of the humans in the inner realm. The hatred that had lasted for tens of thousands of years made this indifference even more murderous. In troubled times, the divine prefecture suffered another catastrophe. Demonic fire burned the earth and countless people died. Just at this moment, in the Desolation City, a sharp sword energy broke through the air. Its power was heaven-shaking and shook the entire divine prefecture. Oh! When the gray-robed old man saw this, surprise flashed in his eyes. There was actually such an expert in the inner realm. Although his cultivation was barely satisfactory, this sword intent was indeed extraordinary. In an instant, the sky above the divine prefecture was filled with swords. Endless sword energy soared into the sky, forming a path of swords. A white-robed figure soared into the sky. His white robe fluttered in the wind, making him look like a sword immortal. No one dared to look directly at him. "Swordsman, are you challenging me?" The gray-robed old man looked at the white-robed young man and asked indifferently. "Why not?" Jian Er clenched his right hand and a broken sword flew out from the Desolation City into his hand. In an instant, the clouds moved and rays of sword energy slashed toward the old man from the foreign races. "Young man who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth." The gray-robed old man raised his hand and an incomparably powerful demonic aura surged out. It was extremely terrifying. The rays of sword energy shattered, unable to pass through the barrier. One sword. Jian Er swung his sword. Endless sword intent rose rapidly. The sword on the sword bloomed beautifully. 10,000 calamities. The peak of the sword in the past reappeared. The sword energy broke through the sky and cut through the demonic fire, bringing a faint light to the world. The two attacks collided, but cracks appeared on Jian Er's broken sword. Blood splashed out. The swordsman retreated several steps. His white robe was dyed red. He was injured in one attack. "Your sword can't stop your defeat." In the surging demonic aura, the gray-robed old man looked at the swordsman in front of him and sneered. "Sword technique." In the void, Jian Er's expression didn't change at all. He guided his vitality to protect his sword. His invisible sword energy soared into the sky. In an instant, the sword intent spread endlessly across the divine prefecture. Wherever the sword went, it became a world of swords. 10,000 swords greet the ancestor. When the sword reached the extreme, 10,000 swords surrendered. In the world of sword intent, rays of sword energy soared into the sky. 10,000 swords circled the sky and turned into a sword cloud storm, covering the cold moon in the sky. After an instant, tens of thousands of sword energy broke through the sky. The scene was shocking and shocked the entire divine prefecture. It was like the battle of the barren city in the past when the sword challenged the gods. Looking around, heaven and earth were swords. Endless sword intent and sword energy. Extreme path versus four realms. What was the limit of the sword? What was the peak of the Tao? In the flames of war, each of them displayed their top abilities. After several exchanges, the sword energy was 10,000. The gray-robed old man blocked the continuous sword energy. Although he had the absolute advantage, he didn't dare to be careless in the face of the swordsman's reckless attack. Sword technique. Slaying fairy. The blue was better than the blue. Jian Er pointed his finger at the sword. His blood energy condensed. In the dim light, an ancient stone sword appeared in the void. The legend of slaying fairy from the ancient times had come to the world again. Seeing this, the gray-robed old man's expression turned serious. He raised his hand and condensed his chi. The demonic aura in his body was fully activated. A giant demon figure appeared and punched down to meet the slaying fairy sword. Slaying fairy shook the demonic figure. Humans could fight immortals and demons. When thunder met, heaven and earth were moved. A pool of blood splashed and dyed the night red. The swordsman kept retreating. His white robe was dyed red. The irreversible difference in cultivation made this battle against the immortals even more tragic. Rip. Suddenly, there was a slight sound of clothes tearing. The clothes on the gray-robed old man's chest were torn. Blood splashed. He was injured for the first time. You are not bad. The gray-robed old man looked at the wound on his chest that was cut by the sword energy. A touch of appreciation flashed across his cold face. He said calmly, "Surrender, and I will spare your life." In the void, Jian didn't answer. He looked down at the barren city with an imperceptible smile on his face. "Master, senior brother, this sword is a tribute to your teachings." One sword. Before the final sword was released, the sword intent had spread out rapidly. In an instant, heaven and earth sank. The whole divine prefecture shook violently. Rocks flew up and disappeared in the sky full of sword energy. The gray-robed old man felt it. He looked serious and didn't dare to hesitate. His figure flashed, and he condensed his chi and attacked Jian chest. With a boom, the heavy palm hit Jian body. Red blood splashed all over the sky. However, the swordsman's body didn't move. His sword intent rose to the peak of his life. No regrets. The final move was close at hand. The momentum was majestic. The dazzling golden sword light slashed down and cut all evil. The broken sword in Jian hand couldn't bear the magnificent sword intent and quickly turned into ashes. The gray-robed old man's expression changed. He wanted to retreat, but it was too late. The sword light fell. It was dazzling. In the cold night, it was like a divine sun shining on the world. It broke through the darkness and brought endless light to the world. Jian. At this moment, a figure in plain clothes rushed over from afar. When she saw the shocking scene in front of her, her pupils shrank. Chapter 979. In the divine great land, the demon disaster had arrived. In the sky above Barren City, where the sword of Barren City had proven its swordsmanship in the past, the peak of the current generation of Barren City swordsmanship reappeared. The magnificent sword of Tao had broken the limit of the realm, shocking the world. At the end of the sword, there was no regret. The dazzling golden sword light slashed down. It was an incomparably brilliant sword that had reached the peak of swordsmanship in the world. Blood splashed everywhere. A terrifying sword wound appeared on the chest of the gray-clothed elder. It was so deep that his bones could be seen. It was extremely frightening. Ugh! The figure that flew out crashed into one mountain after another, causing the mountain rocks to shatter. Huge rocks fell like rain, smashing out huge craters. After the sword, the white-clothed figure fell from the sky powerlessly. He looked at the world for the last time with no regrets. Jian. In the distance, Ning Chen's pupils shrank. He flashed and caught the falling swordsman. His body couldn't help but tremble. "You're back." Feeling the familiar aura around him, Jian eyes flashed with relief. He could relax now that Jian was back. "Protect your heart. Don't talk." Ning Chen's body kept trembling. The life scroll was activated, forcibly entering Jian body to prolong his life. "It's useless." At this moment, a trace of exhaustion flashed across Sword 2's weak face as he said, "Don't talk. Don't give up. We've gone through so many hardships. We'll be fine." Ning Chen's voice trembled. His body kept increasing. Suddenly, the wind and snow between heaven and earth rolled. A terrifying wind and snow vortex filled the sky above the divine great land. It was earth-shattering, shaking the stars. "Ji Ming, listen to me." Jian struggled to raise his hand, grabbing Jian arm. He used the last of his strength to say, "I can't continue my master and senior brother's swordsmanship. Cheng Shui uses the sword but doesn't cultivate it. She can't inherit Barren City's swordsmanship. But you're different. Although you're not a disciple of Barren City, you've learned swordsmanship from your master. Your swordsmanship is not weaker than anyone else's. So, from now on, the glory of Barren City can only be protected by you." "Don't talk anymore." Ning Chen's heart was in great pain. It was so painful that he couldn't breathe. The true qi in his body kept leaking out. The body of a swordsman couldn't contain any more energy. "Ji Ming, your sword shouldn't be covered in dust." With a soft murmur, an indescribable sword intent rose around Jian and entered the bodies of the people around him. In the end, this was the only thing he could do for her. The powerless arm that fell down was stained with blood. The swordsman left his soul behind. From now on, he would forever guard this pure land, never to rest until death. There was a short moment of silence in the sky. Then, a wild laughter that made one's heart palpitate resounded. The laughter was like muffled thunder and lightning flashed. Violent wind and snow shot into the 9 heavens. In an instant, the heavens and the earth changed and thunder pierced through the 9 continents. In the distant mountains and rivers, the blood-soaked gray-robed elder soared into the air. The terrifying sword wound on his chest was so terrifying that fresh blood continuously flowed out, dyeing his entire body red. Even a Realm 4 expert, a legendary realm expert, was severely injured by the life-risking sword of Desolate City's current generation. The legend of Barren City had lasted for 100 years. 100 years ago and 100 years after, it had never been disgraced. You deserve to die 10,000 deaths. The gray-robed elder's face was filled with rage. His figure flashed past, and his demonic aura surged. A terrifying 3-headed demonic shadow appeared. The demonic aura gathered, and a shocking punch smashed down toward the 2 people in the wind and snow. In the wild wind and snow, a white-robed figure walked out. Her white hair danced wildly, and her eyes instantly turned black. Her eyes were like the abyss, and one look at them would make one sink into them. At this moment, dark clouds rapidly gathered in the 9 heavens. Layers of lightning fell with a loud boom. An abnormally terrifying power, along with a shocking destructive power, descended upon the human world. The moment the 2 bodies merged, the tribulation of the true realm descended with a thunderous rumble. Its boundless might surpassed all common sense, and it made everyone feel a bone-deep fear. With a bang, a palm met the demonic fist. An earth-shattering collision sounded. Wild waves surged around the 2, and layers of space collapsed in response. In the next moment, lightning fell and engulfed the 2 bodies. The heavenly might destroyed the demonic. The 2 people in the middle of the tribulation were immediately affected by the heavenly tribulation, and they each took a few steps back. Not good. Within the lightning, the gray-robed elder's expression changed. With a flip of his palm, he blocked layer after layer of lightning. However, with each layer he blocked, the lightning's power became stronger. It was endless and shocking. Rumble. Heavenly lightning fell from the 9 heavens once more. The surging lightning instantly turned scarlet, and its power rose endlessly. Avicii Hell Palace. Ning-Chen shouted, and the ghost palace appeared, turning into a barrier to block his own tribulation. He took a step forward, and wind and snow swept up as he rushed forward. Below the lightning, the gray-robed elder miserably blocked another tribulation. Before he could react, the white-robed figure had already arrived in front of him. Spirit Rhino 12 Styles, Heaven-Raising Waterfall. At such a close distance, a heavy palm pressed down on the elder's chest. In an instant, wind and snow filled the sky. An incomparably tyrannical power poured into the elder's body, forcibly destroying his bones. With a muffled groan, the gray-robed elder retreated several steps. The heavenly tribulation had affected his body, and he was at a disadvantage. Rumble. The true realm's tribulation was endless. Above the 9 heavens, the blood-colored tribulation cloud changed again. It turned from red to black, and the heavy aura made it hard for people to breathe. In the world of darkness, lightning descended, and the power to destroy all living things tore apart the heaven and earth. The gray-robed elder's expression changed drastically. He raised both of his palms to block the lightning. With a world-shaking vibration, the lightning pierced through the protection of the demonic chi and landed on his body. Heaven's wrath shocked the world, and gods and demons grieved. The gray-robed elder groaned painfully. Blood boiled all over his body, unable to withstand the destructive might of the lightning. On the other side, the black lightning descended, and the Avicii Hell Palace cried out continuously. Just as the ghost palace was about to collapse, a broken green cauldron appeared and blocked the lightning. Below, Ning-Chen condensed his martial body and activated the 5 scrolls at the same time. His powerful martial soul was like a dazzling radiance. In the vision of destruction and creation, his figure flashed past, and his heavy palm pressed down on the elder's chest. After receiving another heavy blow, blood dyed the night sky. The gray-robed elder retreated again and again. His true chi was in chaos. This was the first time in countless years that he felt so close to death. Above Ning Chen's head, the celestial cauldron blocked the heavenly tribulation. His white hair danced in the wind, and his eyes were like an abyss. His demonic and crazy demeanor made people shudder. In an instant, the white-robed figure disappeared again. Fist after fist landed on the elder's body. The life-knowing destiny state burned with hatred. For the revenge of his close friend, he sacrificed himself and turned into a demon. With the demon as the leader, he slaughtered. The heavy fists landed on the elder's body, and blood splattered everywhere. The gray-robed elder took one heavy blow after another. He was forced to retreat, and the heavenly tribulation surrounded him. He was at a complete disadvantage. At this moment, outside the 5 regions, figures arrived one after another. Their auras were terrifying, and none of them were weaker than the gray-robed elder. They looked toward the east with strange expressions. There was actually such a strong cultivator in the inner realm. Although he had the help of the heavenly tribulation, he was the first person in the world who could suppress a 4th realm cultivator. "Do you want to help?" A demonic man with long green hair asked. Among the 5, the man in purple shook his head and said, "We can't defile the heavens. If we help now, we will only get burned. It's not worth it." "But if this continues, Li Tu will very likely die in the hands of that young man," the green-haired man said coldly. The man in purple looked ahead quietly. After a while, he said lightly, "Then let's wait for that young man's heavenly tribulation to end and send him to accompany Li Tuesday." Just as the two of them were conversing, in the night sky above the divine lands that was engulfed by black thunderbolts, the injuries on the gray-robed elder were getting more and more severe. The heavenly tribulation struck his body, and his heavy fists bombarded him. The power of man and the might of the heavens caused the powerful 4th realm cultivator to be in a sorry state. In the heavenly tribulation, layers of sword intent rose around the white-robed young man. Although it was very weak, it was clearly manifested. Before he died, the last sword of the barren city injected all his sword bones, sword intent, sword aura, and sword sense into the body of the life-knowing destiny state, giving the legend of the barren city a glimmer of hope. 9 Heavens star-picking hand, final form, formless form. He stepped forward and instantly appeared in front of the elder. He gathered all the power in his palm and imprinted it on the elder's energy reserve with a boom. In an instant, lightning descended and completely engulfed the two of them. The figure that fell from the sky crashed onto the ground. Under the lightning, the white-robed figure stood in the air. His frenzied killing intent did not diminish at all. He dashed forward and rushed downwards. With one step, the ground collapsed. The 4th realm cultivator under his feet spat out blood. He was so embarrassed that it was hard to believe. His broken martial bones pierced through his skin. The eyes of the life-knowing destiny, who had turned into a demon, were filled with cruel killing intent. He exerted more force on his feet and trampled on the last dignity of the 4th realm cultivator. Enough! Outside the divine land, the green-haired man among the 5 4th realm cultivators could no longer watch. He stepped forward and rushed forward. Behind him, the man in purple narrowed his eyes. Without saying anything, he flashed and disappeared from the spot. Seeing the two of them move, the other 3 4th realm cultivators looked at each other and followed them. The 5 4th realm cultivators arrived at the same time. The ground above the divine land shook violently. Countless martial artists were shocked and looked desperate. "Bad guys, leave quickly." In the northern Meng royal court, Ming Yu, who was dressed in a dragon robe, stood in front of the palace and said anxiously when she saw this disastrous scene, "Kid, leave quickly. Where there's life, there's hope." In the barbarian dynasty, the old barbarian king also walked out. He looked at the sky with a gloomy face and shouted, "Fit." In the great Xia dynasty palace, the dragon guards also recovered from their shock. They were extremely anxious. "You want to leave?" "Difficult," the green-haired man said coldly. He flipped his palms and a turbid green light spread. The destructive power continued to spread and shrouded the entire divine land. On the ground, Ningchen looked up and looked coldly at the sky. He was not moved at all. He exerted more force on his feet. With a loud boom, he stomped the gray-robed old man completely into the ground. Since the heavens wanted to destroy the divine land, then let them go to hell together. The divine land is not a place where you can behave atrociously. Just as everyone was in despair, a calm and indifferent voice sounded between heaven and earth. Under everyone's shocked gazes, a cold figure in a green robe walked over slowly from afar. Each step was steady and heavy. Legend, legend. The legend of the divine land swordsman who disappeared for 100 years has reappeared. The king has appeared, and the world is silent. Chapter 980. The flames of war spread across the land of the divine prefecture. The 5 fourth realms came together. Everyone was terrified, and the despair in their hearts reached its peak. Just then, a king walked out slowly from the smoke. His aura was restrained, but he had an indescribable aura of a grandmaster. The top cultivator of the divine prefecture came to the mortal world again. A legend had arrived. The 5 fourth realms in the sky were all stunned. The powerful cultivator. The sword rack landed on the ground. The aura of the 5 ancient swords was faintly discernible. Green and red light shone. Sword sand filled the air. The celestial slayer was powerful. There was also a never-before-seen ancient sword in its scabbard. Only the occasional sword aura made people feel endless pressure. As the swordsman appeared, the thunder in the sky quieted down. It seemed to be shocked by the king's aura. "Where's your sword?" Prince Yen looked over at the young man in plain clothes and said indifferently, "It's useless." The darkness in Ning Chen's eyes faded. He regained his calmness and answered honestly. Prince Yen nodded and said, "It's good that it's useless. An impure sword is useless. Step aside." Facing the last elder in his life, Ning Chen didn't dare to go against him. He retreated temporarily. In the sky, the 5 fourth realms landed slowly. They looked at the man in green in front of them. Their auras kept increasing. They felt that the swordsman in front of them was unusual. He held his swords in reverse and unsheathed them. In an instant, green and red light filled the sky. A powerful sword aura swept out. It was shocking. "Green and red swords. Let me experience your moves." In a casual tone, Prince Yen held his swords with both hands. He stood alone. Gods and demons couldn't pass him. Among the 5, the green-haired man's eyes darkened. He flashed and gathered his palms. One palm could shake the world. The power of a 4th realm cultivator was beyond imagination. Half of the divine prefecture shook. The power of a 4th realm cultivator surpassed the limits of heaven and earth. The mortal world couldn't withstand it. Strong winds blew. In the wind and waves, the king moved his sword. The green sword swung and froze everything within 1,000 miles. Everything froze and the world fell silent. With a boom, the sword and palm collided. The wind and snow surged. The green-haired man felt his aura stagnate. Under the extreme cold, his true chi couldn't flow smoothly. At close range, the king's body was like a flowing shadow. His body moved with his sword, and his red sword cut through the sky. As the sword slashed down, heat waves burned the sky. The green-haired man's expression changed slightly. He wanted to block the attack, but the sword aura trapped his body, making it difficult for him to move. At the moment of crisis, a sturdy man with scales on his arms rushed out from behind. His fist shook the red sword and blocked the sword light. With the help of the scaled race, the green-haired man was able to extricate himself immediately. His entire body glowed with green light as he raised the triple success body. The 2 experts joined forces, each displaying their peerless abilities. Their abnormally powerful cultivation bases were about to suppress the king's sword. In the battle, Prince Yan's expression didn't change at all in the face of 2 powerful figures working together. Green and red danced together, and the sword light shone brightly. 2 swords against 2 strong opponents. The king's body was surrounded by sword aura, impenetrable by 10,000 techniques. His peerless demeanor made people look askance. After exchanging several blows, the king's sword became sharper and sharper. His sword technique was flawless. His defense was impenetrable, and his attacks were as aggressive as fire. Even though the two of them worked together, it was still difficult for them to gain the upper hand. "You two go as well." Outside the battlefield, the purple-robed man looked at the battlefield and said in a serious tone, "Yes." The two alien experts nodded. Their figures flashed as they joined the battle. Their sharp claws tore through the air. The two eagle experts entered the battle, and the battle immediately became white-hot. The clanging sounds of the sharp blades clashing reverberated between heaven and earth. In the distance, mountains and rivers were affected by the aftershocks, and they shook violently. The four experts joined forces, and their fists and palms intersected. It was a terrifying scene that could topple heaven and earth. Around the battlefield, the space shattered, turning into nothingness as the five experts clashed. 3 swords equal the heavens, life and death contract. The sword reached its peak, and the king's figure flew out of the battlefield. His 2 swords left his hands and soared into the 9 heavens. In an instant, sand filled the sword rack, and an invisible sword flew out. The wind and sand gathered and condensed into a sword. The king held the sword, and the surrounding heaven and earth instantly froze. The 3 swords hummed together, and a terrifying sword pressure swept out rapidly. Outside the battlefield, the purple-robed man's expression changed slightly. He stepped out and immediately joined the battle. His true yuan was fully activated, and a dazzling purple light soared into the sky, helping the 4 people resist the sword that was about to arrive. In the next moment, an unprecedented power descended from the void. A huge whirlpool was stirred up, and rays of sword light fell from the sky, reversing life and death, slaying immortals and suppressing demons. Ugh, a sword of life and death. The 5 Fourth Realm cultivators groaned in unison and retreated a few steps. After the sword, they were severely injured. Outside the battlefield, Ning Chen saw this shocking scene, and his heart was in turmoil. Senior's sword has surpassed the one and only sword? The 5 experts were defeated, and they were all shocked. At this moment, in the sky above the divine lands, powerful auras appeared one after another. 7 cultivators who had surpassed the limits of the mortal realm had joined forces to explore the pure land of the Netherworld King. 12 Fourth Realm cultivators, a shocking lineup. The divine lands could no longer withstand the terrifying pressure. The ground collapsed, rivers flooded, and fire spewed out. Disasters continued. In the battlefield, King Yen looked at the 7 figures descending from the sky and frowned slightly. He did not want to drag the battle any longer, and his figure flashed to the front of the sword rack. With the 5th sword in his hand, he pulled it out and slashed the sky. While everyone was still in shock, the 5th sword that they had never seen before was slowly unsheathed. A dazzling light rose, and the surrounding heaven and earth suddenly became heavy. The gravity increased tenfold, and the 7 Fourth Realm cultivators in the void immediately felt their bodies sink, and they could not stabilize their bodies. "I'm warning you for the last time. The Divine Lands is not a place for you to behave atrociously." As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in the king's hand swung. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed. A majestic sword light broke through the night and slashed towards the 7 people in the void. The 7 foreign race cultivators looked serious. They joined forces to block the king's sword. Their vital essence condensed and formed a huge law barrier in front of them. In an instant, the sword light swept past, and an earth-shattering vibration sounded. The law barrier shattered, and it could not block the king's sword. The ultimate sword was limitless. As the sword light flashed, blood splattered. The 7 people were hit by the sword at the same time, and they all retreated a few steps, looking shocked. "Powerful swordsman, your sword reminds me of an old friend." Just as the 7 cultivators retreated, a war chariot pulled by a skeleton horse appeared in the sky. A horrifying pressure that had never been seen before in the mortal realm descended. Before the person walked out, the entire divine lands was shaking violently. "King!" Seeing this, the 12 Fourth Realm cultivators looked serious. They bowed in unison and said respectfully, Looking at the skeleton chariot that appeared in the sky, a cold look flashed in King Yan's eyes. He said, "Since you have come to this world, follow the rules. The mortal realm is not a place for you to trample. The 100 tribes are powerful, and the human race is weak. This is the truth. Swordsman, how long can you protect them?" A majestic voice came from the skeleton chariot, and it said calmly, "The human race is not as bad as you think. You can't bear the consequences of being too arrogant," King Yan said coldly. "Oh, is that so?" The skeleton carriage descended from the sky. A middle-aged man in purple scale armor walked out from the flying dust. His aura was majestic, and it was as bottomless as the ocean. It made all living beings feel how insignificant they were. The Purple Scale King, who was known to be the best in defense among the 100 tribes, appeared in the Divine Lands for the first time. He did not hold back at all and faced the legendary swordsman of the Divine Lands. Abyss Condensation. With the appearance of the alien king, Prince Yan's expression also turned serious. He clenched his right hand, and in the dark light, a sword of the first seal appeared. The sixth sword appeared, and the battlefield immediately became distorted. All the light was quickly swallowed up, and it was difficult to escape the gravity of the abyss. Looking at the sword in the former's hand, the Purple Scale King's expression turned serious. He didn't waste any more time. His figure flashed, and his fist condensed the power of Vajra. He attacked first. When the fist arrived, the king's sword met it. With a boom, the world was turned upside down. The battle between the two kings was even fiercer than before. Every move they made had the power to destroy the world. As they fought, disasters were everywhere in the Divine Lands. Outside the battle, Ningchen looked at the battle in front of him. His shocked heart gradually calmed down, and he focused on observing the sword. The Netherworld King's Pure Land is indeed a place full of outstanding people. Such a swordsman is definitely a strong cultivator even in my realm. At this moment, clouds gathered in the sky. 2 chariots appeared at the same time. 2 auras that were not inferior to the Purple Scale King's descended. The situation made people despair again and again. It was a catastrophe comparable to the descent of the Netherworld King. 3 king-level existences had descended upon the Divine Lands. Each of them had the power to destroy the mortal realm. With the 3 of them appearing at the same time, the Divine Lands was in danger. In the battle, King Yan's expression turned serious for the first time. He condensed his vital essence on the Vital Essence sword, and for the first time, he released all of his techniques. The sword aura rushed into the sky, and it was majestic. The top swordsman of the mortal realm displayed his peak sword skills. Everyone was shocked, and a glimmer of hope rose in their hearts. In the void, light flowed from the 2 chariots. 2 figures walked out. They were the kings of the 100 races. They slowly descended, and their eyes were cruel and cold as they looked at the battle. "Purple Scale King, do you need our help?" the 2 kings asked lightly. In the battle, the Purple Scale King flipped his palm and pushed away the king's sword. He looked serious and said, "If you want to help, then do it." "Why are you talking so much nonsense?" "Ah!" The 2 kings sneered. For the Purple Scale King to say something like that, it seemed that this swordsman was so powerful that even the Purple Scale King, who was known as the best in defense, felt pressured. With the same interests, the 2 kings did not say anything more. They flashed and joined the battle. The 3 kings worked together. Their attacks had the power to destroy the world. In the shaking heaven and earth, King Yan's hand that was holding the sword dripped with blood. It was the first time he was injured in the battle. "How can you blaspheme the king's sword?" The dripping blood dyed the blade red. King Yan's face showed murderous intent for the first time. He flew out and withdrew from the battle. In front of the sword, the king fixed his body. He grasped the sword with his left hand and pulled it out. Kill the Immortal appeared. Heaven and earth shook. On the broken blade, countless sword lights gathered and repaired the broken sword. Abyss Condensation and Kill the Immortal appeared together for the first time. In an instant, the sword pressure became solid. Everything in the world stopped, and the extreme state of the sword descended. Chapter 981. The divine prefecture was facing a calamity. The four realms descended, and the three kings appeared at the same time. They were existences that could destroy the heavens and the earth, plunging everyone into despair. The kings were injured for the first time. They struggled to pull out the celestial sword. Abyss condensation and celestial slaughter were used at the same time. The extreme realm of the sword appeared for the first time. The heavens and the earth trembled, and the stars in the sky swayed. The extreme realm descended, and the entire divine prefecture was shrouded in the aura of the sword. The mountains and rivers disintegrated, unable to bear the power of the extreme realm of the sword. The three kings felt it, and their expressions turned serious. The black and white vulture kings condensed their primordial chi. On their claws, black and white light rose, and the power to tear everything overflowed. On the side, the purple scale king also urged his primordial chi. Purple light rose, and the unbreakable protection became even more powerful. His purple scale armor shone brilliantly, and the king's aura swept across the land. The three kings fought against the legend, and the battle entered a whole new level. Around the four of them, light shone, and as their figures intersected, all the laws were destroyed. The king's sword and the celestial sword danced like dragons, cutting through layers of primordial chi and demonic barriers. The legend of Xia, the legend of the divine prefecture swordsman, won against the three kings. The battle had reached its climax. Within the extreme state of the sword, streaks of red lightning flashed past. The tiny lightning bolts were only the size of a pinky finger. However, the terrifying destructive power caused people's hearts to tremble. No one dared to touch them. In the battle, the three kings looked very serious. They dodged the streaks of extreme realm blood lightning, and gathered the heavenly path's precepts with their heavy palms and claws. The king's sword met them, and the primordial seal sword once again showed its shocking power. The heavenly path's precepts quickly disappeared, swallowed by the king's sword. The king's sword sealed the moves of the three kings. The celestial sword then slashed out. The ancient sword of slaughter had the power to break through 10,000 techniques. The purple-scaled king swung his fist to shake the celestial sword, but there was a sound that shook the heavens. The king retreated, the scales on his fist actually cracked. Known as the best defense of the 100 tribes, he had the unbreakable protection. However, under the celestial sword, the king's scales were constantly damaged and showed signs of collapse. Seeing this, the black and white vulture kings split up, their sharp claws tearing through the air. Two black and white beams of killing light broke through the air, tearing at the legendary swordsman in the battle. Prince Yen narrowed his eyes and focused for a moment. His figure flashed out and arrived in front of the white vulture king. His sword swallowed the light of the sharp claws and flashed past. At the moment of crisis, the purple-scaled king took a step forward and stood in front of him. He used both his arms to block the immortal sword. With a rumble, the celestial sword slashed down. Tiny bolts of blood-red lightning gathered in the ultimate realm of the sword, aiding the celestial sword as it slashed down the number one defensive king of the 100 tribes. With a muffled groan, blood spurted out. The scales on the purple-scaled king's arm shattered one by one. The immortal sword cut through the unending protection and heavily injured the purple-scaled king. As the sword chi entered his body, blood spurted out from his body. The purple-scaled king took a few steps back. His body was covered in blood, and he looked extremely miserable. "Your Majesty!" Outside the battle, the expressions of the 12 Realm 4 cultivators changed drastically as they exclaimed in shock. With one king retreating, the two kings advanced. The black and white vulture kings took advantage of this opportunity and charged forward like lightning. Their claws were indestructible and merciless as they tore at the swordsman's body. With the two kings attacking, the swordsman was enraged. The king's sword and the immortal sword combined to meet the attack. With a rumble, the heavens shook and the earth shook. Among the splashes of blood, the two kings flew back several feet and were both heavily injured. It was a shocking scene. The three kings joined forces, but they were all stained red and were at a disadvantage. With disbelief, the three kings looked at the swordsman in the battle. Their hearts were in turmoil. Just how powerful was this person? Purple-scaled King, Vulture King, it's rare to see you in such a sorry state. At this moment, above the 9 heavens, another powerful aura appeared. The 6 kings appeared and suppressed the 9 states. It was truly terrifying. The 6 kings descended from the sky together. Their domineering aura shook the heavens and the earth. With the 9 kings moving, the heavens and the earth were shocked. Outside the battle, Ning Chen's body trembled, and he looked anxious. No matter how strong the senior was, it was impossible for him to deal with 9 cultivators of this level at the same time. They were too powerful. With the catastrophe of the divine prefecture, the situation was getting more and more dangerous. The 9 kings joined forces and suppressed the border. Outside the 5 regions, Di Mingtian and Mo Luotian walked out and looked at the battle in the distance. The speed at which the kings received the news was beyond their expectations. However, the strength of the swordsman was truly shocking. In the divine prefecture, the 9 kings appeared at the same time. There was no turning back. The powerful king's aura spread out. Everyone prostrated themselves and wailed. Just as everyone was weeping, the clouds in the distance moved. An elegant voice sounded, startling all the kings. Kings of the divine prefecture, you have crossed the line. As the voice sounded, a white-robed figure walked out from the void. He had a scholarly appearance and did not have any killing intent. He was calm and peaceful. This is... Outside the 5 regions, Mo Luotian looked at the newcomer and his expression changed. Young Master Xiao Bai. You know him? Seeing the change in the expression of the person beside him, Di Mingtan frowned and asked. Yes. Mo Luotian nodded and said in a low voice, more than 200 years ago, this person was defeated by me. After that battle, he disappeared completely and there was no news about him. In that case, this person should not be feared, Di Mingtian said lightly. Mo Luotian looked at the white-robed man in the divine prefecture with a serious expression. This person is different. Perhaps he did not use his full strength in the battle back then. Young Master Xiao Bai, who had disappeared for more than 200 years, appeared for the first time in the battle of the divine prefecture. The 9 kings looked at the unfamiliar cultivator who had appeared without warning. They were serious and did not dare to be careless. He dared to appear in such a situation. If he was not a lunatic, he was a true cultivator. Sorry I'm late. Young Master Xiao Bai said apologetically as he looked at the king of the great Xia dynasty who was blocking the kings alone. You're not late. Prince Yan turned around and looked at the person who had come. He replied calmly, Is that lord not here yet? Master asked me to come first. He will be here soon, young Master Xiao Bai replied. King Yan nodded and looked back at the 9 kings of the foreign tribes. Although these people were strong, the real trouble had yet to come. In the ancient times, the heavenly demons who had wreaked havoc in the human world were far more powerful than these kings of the foreign tribes. In the Red Phoenix Galaxy, in the fog of the galaxy, a vague and terrifying aura was slowly awakening. It was so shocking that it was beyond imagination and made people shudder. Above the kings, the true cultivators of the heavenly demon realm, the aura kept rising. The peerless cultivators of the 100 tribes woke up from their deep slumber and returned to the human world after countless years. In the battle above the divine prefecture, King Yen and young Master Xiao Bai felt the shocking aura from the distant galaxy. Their expressions turned serious. It was finally here. At this moment, golden clouds gathered above the void. The aura that was indescribably powerful was awakening. It surpassed everything and was unparalleled. Welcome, King of Scales. Seeing this, the 9 kings bowed and said respectfully. The King of Scales had appeared. He was the true strongest cultivator of the foreign tribes. The kings bowed and did not dare to cross him. Rise. In the clouds, a majestic voice said calmly. Thank you, King of Scales. The 9 kings acknowledged the order. In front of the 9 kings, King Yen and young Master Xiao Bai looked at the clouds in the sky. Their expressions became more serious. The King of Scales was in trouble. The pure land of the Netherworld King. I didn't expect it to be so filthy. It seems like the Netherworld King spent so much effort to create a pure land, but in the end he still failed. Humans are ultimately a race with filthy hearts. The Netherworld King's choice was wrong from the very beginning. Within the auspicious cloud, the voice of the Scaled Emperor rang out once more. Below, the 9 kings stood respectfully. They looked at the divine prefecture with disgust. Humans did not deserve to live in this pure land. King of Scales, you foreign tribes don't have to worry about the humans' right and wrong. At this moment, in the distance, an old man with a walking stick appeared. Beside the old man, a young girl with bright eyes and white teeth was sitting in a wheelchair. Together, they walked toward the battle. Seeing the old man, young Master Xiaobai in white cupped his fists and bowed. He said respectfully, "Master?" The old man nodded. He looked at the sword-wielding king and said in a hoarse voice, "Thank you for your hard work." King Yen nodded slightly. Without saying anything, he walked out of the battle. "Senior." Outside the battle, Ning Chen looked at the approaching figure and asked in confusion, "Who are these people?" "Young Master Xiaobai." King Yen replied calmly. He looked at the old man and continued, "As for that lord, he's not someone you can come into contact with yet. You can leave the rest to him." Ning Chen was shocked. To be addressed so respectfully by his senior, he must be terrifying in terms of both power and seniority. Was there such a powerful cultivator in the human world? Why didn't a single fourth realm cultivator appear when the demon palace was in chaos? While he was lost in thought, the old man stared at the rolling clouds in the sky. A trace of exhaustion flashed across his aged face. He said, "Scaled Emperor, do you want to make a move? Although my old bones haven't exercised for many years, it shouldn't be a problem for me to kill all these kings under your command." "Most powerful cultivator of the human race, are you threatening me?" In the clouds, the King of Scales said with a hint of anger. "It's not a threat. The choice is in your hands. Now that the 100 tribes have appeared, the Scaled tribe is not the only royal tribe. If we lose more than 10 kings here, I'm sure the other tribes will be happy to see it happen," the old man said in a hoarse voice. Within the cloud, the emperor of the Scaled clan was silent. After a long while, he said coldly, "This time, I'll give you face and give you a piece of advice. The human race is weak. You can't protect them all by yourself. Retreat." At his command, the 9 kings' figures flashed and gradually faded away. Behind them, the 12 fourth realm cultivators moved as well. They took the corpses of the dead fourth realm cultivators and disappeared together. The catastrophe was temporarily averted. In the divine land, the earth shook for a long time. Ning Chen looked at the devastated earth and clenched his fists. "From today onwards, you will learn the sword from me again." King Yen glanced at the young man beside him and said calmly. Chapter 982. In the divine prefecture, the alien races descended. The war caused immeasurable damage to the divine prefecture, resulting in countless casualties. After the war, the kings of the alien races left, leaving behind the crying people of the divine prefecture. The heavens couldn't bear it and poured down sorrowful rain. The rain poured down, creating deep ravines. This catastrophe came without warning, but it was like a storm that destroyed the hope of everyone in the world. Under the pouring rain, the elder turned around and left with his walking stick. Young Master Xiaobai walked behind the girl, pushed the wheelchair, and followed him. In the barren city, Jian Luing took over the dead second brother. His body trembled, and his teary eyes couldn't hide his sadness. Ning Chen's heart hurt like a sharp knife. He couldn't say a word. 3 days later, Ning Chen walked out of the barren city. His eyes covered all his emotions, and he became strong again. "Follow me." Prince Yen said calmly in front of the barren city and walked forward. Ning Chen went forward and carried the sword rack on his back, following silently. In the continuous mountain range, 2 figures were walking over. In front of a large waterfall that fell from the sky, the king stopped and said indifferently, "Let's do it here." Behind him, Ning Chen nodded. He walked to the side and put down the sword rack, waiting quietly for orders. "Pick up your sword," Prince Yen said calmly. Ning Chen was silent. After a while, he waved his right hand. In the flowing light, the famous sword of Taoism appeared again, shining brightly. Righteous Chi. This sword can't be covered in dust. Prince Yen saw the sword in the former's hand and grasped it. Not far away, the sword rack moved slightly, and red light shone. The red sword flew into the king's hand. Hold your sword tightly and move with me. As soon as he finished, Prince Yen waved his hand. In the sky, the supreme state appeared, and blood-red lightning filled the air. The supreme state on the sword descended majestically. The king's sword moved, and blood-red lightning filled the sky. The supreme state on the sword overflowed, bringing the knowing destiny body beside it and moving with the sword. The king taught the sword, and the sword aura filled the air. He taught from the most basic sword moves, simple and unadorned. The Taoist sword in Ning Chen's hand moved with him. The sword bone, sword will, sword aura, and sword sense kept rising. They went from rejecting each other to merging into his body. The desolate city sword and the king's sword filled each other. Blood exploded around Ning Chen, dyeing his clothes red. In the extreme realm, Prince Yen saw the blood mist erupting from the former's body. He frowned and stopped. What happened to your sword bone? I'm fine. Ning Chen endured the intense pain in his body and said, Senior, please continue. I can endure it. Yen Qin Prince did not ask any more questions. If someone else's sword bone wanted to merge with his body, he would have to endure the pain himself. The king's sword moved again, but this time it did not stop. The sword moved, crisscrossing in the extreme realm of the sword, surging like thunder, dazzling the eyes. Ning Chen's body moved along with the king's sword. Every time he swung the sword bone would fuse into his body a little bit more, and the pain would increase a little bit more. The dripping sweat mixed with the overflowing blood, drenching his clothes over and over again. Ning Chen's hand that was holding the sword did not loosen at all. Only after losing it once did he know how rare it was to be able to hold a sword again. He could not lose to himself, otherwise, he would have failed Jian Air before he died. The breath of humanity rang in the extreme realm. Prince Yen listened to the sound of the former sword, and the extreme realm of the sword increased. Since he had the determination and will, as a senior, he would do his best to fulfill his wish. After 100 moves, the king's sword suddenly changed. Its killing intent exploded, and it swept past quickly. Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. He instinctively waved the sword in his hand to block the king's sword. With a loud bang, the king's sword shook off the former sword. The sword did not change at all, and it continued to sweep forward. The sword went in half an inch and stopped. Prince Yen looked at the young man in front of him and said calmly, From now on, your sword is not allowed to have any impurities. Otherwise, I will destroy it again. The divine prefecture no longer needs you to protect it. Your mission is over. Ning Chen listened without saying a word. After a while, he nodded lightly. Practice by yourself until you can feel the sword breath. I will go to the imperial city of the Xia dynasty and return in 10 days. With that, Prince Yen waved his hand and collected the sword rack on the ground. Then he walked into the distance. Ning Chen stood in front of the waterfall and looked at the sword in his hand silently. The senior was right. The divine prefecture no longer needed his protection. He was not qualified. Not to mention the kings and emperors of the foreign races, even the most ordinary cultivators of the fourth realm were difficult for him to fight head-on. If the senior had not returned in time, the divine prefecture would have been doomed. In front of absolute power, all schemes were useless. His sword was not enough to protect the people he cherished. The rumbling sound of the waterfall drowned out the breath of the sword. In front of the waterfall, Su Yi raised her sword again. It was so simple that there were no more complicated moves. Just as knowing destiny returned to the divine prefecture, countless cultivators flew out of the space cracks that had been cut open in the mist of the Red Luan galaxy. In just a few days, cultivators of the 100 clans descended on the mortal world one after another. Fourth plane cultivators and king-level cultivators emerged one after another. However, there was no one above the king level other than the King of Scales. In the battle of the divine prefecture, the legend of the Xia dynasty shocked the 100 races. The existence of the unfamiliar elder of the human race became a taboo. Even among the 100 races, there were only a handful of cultivators who were comparable to the emperors of the 100 races. No one dared to offend them. Cultivators of the 100 races appeared in all the galaxies. They occupied one land after another in an overbearing manner and established their own sections. The era of the 100 races fighting for supremacy came so suddenly that everyone, from the sects to the common people, had to accept this cruel and chaotic world. Kings were overseeing the various divine lands. Due to the prestige of the unfamiliar elder of the human race, no large-scale battles were launched for the time being. However, the 100 races were powerful, and the humans were weak. The unequal distribution of benefits was clear. The war of the 100 races dividing the humans' territories and resources seemed inevitable. In the Z-Way galaxy, the divine capital mountain and the purple scale abyss were facing each other from a distance. The two powerful races with emperors chose the Z-Way galaxy, which was closest to the inner realm, to continue the war that had lasted for thousands of years. In the purple scale abyss, Di Mingtian stood in front of the abyss and quietly looked at the vast starry sky in front of him. Light flashed in his eyes. "Your Highness." A man in purple walked over and bowed respectfully. "It's time." Di Mingtian came back to his senses and nodded. He turned around and walked toward the abyss behind him. After coming out for so long, he had wasted too much time. Now, it was time to make up for these 100 years. In the purple scale abyss, among the new dangerous lands, Di Mingtian walked through them. An hour later, he stopped in front of a jade pool that did not look too big. In front of the dragonization pool, the purple scale king turned around and looked at the figure walking over. He calmly said, "This is the dragonization pool water that your grandfather specially brought. Don't disappoint your grandfather and father." Di Mingtian bowed respectfully and walked into the dragonization pool step by step. At the same time, in an unknown divine realm, a withered old man stood quietly. He looked at the sorrowful people, and the fatigue in his turbid eyes became even stronger. The 100 races had appeared, and the dark age of the human world had arrived. If the humans could not survive this calamity, it would be the true eternal night. Future. Behind him, a young girl with bright eyes and white teeth walked over in a wheelchair. She looked at the old man in front of her and called out softly. The old man turned around and looked at the young girl in the wheelchair. His voice was hoarse as he asked, "Peacock, how is it?" "I don't feel anything," the young girl said truthfully. The old man nodded and said, "It's normal that you don't feel anything when you meet for the first time. In the future, you will have many chances to meet. Feelings can be cultivated slowly. There's no rush." "Teacher, why do you think so highly of that person? Whether it's talent or strength, this person should not be the best choice." In the wheelchair, Peacock's beautiful face showed a hint of confusion. Talent is no longer a decisive factor after reaching the fourth realm. As for strength, no one is born invincible. He has only cultivated for a short time. "It's already not bad that he can reach this level," the old man said softly. "Teacher's assumption is that this person can enter the fourth realm. However, if he can't enter this realm, talent is an insurmountable gap. No one can change it," Peacock said seriously. The old man was silent. After a long while, he sighed softly and said, "I only saw a glimpse of the future from this person's growth. No one can guarantee what the future will be like. I will not force you. The choice is in your hands. I can't decide for you about marriage." In the wheelchair, Peacock nodded and said, "Teacher, don't worry. If this person can enter the fourth realm as you say, then I am willing to support him with all my strength. However, if he can't, then I can only choose someone else." The old man nodded and did not say anything more. He turned around and looked at the world again. The sadness in his eyes was hard to hide. The match between Peacock and man will always be the king of the world. In this era, they needed an absolute powerhouse to intimidate the 100 tribes. He chose that young man. However, whether he could do it or not still depended on the young man's own ability. He would not interfere too much. Everyone's path should be walked by themselves. That young man's will was so strong that it far surpassed his peers. This was the most important quality on the path of cultivation. The path of cultivation was long and no one could have a smooth journey. It was easy to survive one blow, but what about 10, 100, 1,000? It was not easy to bear the weight of all living beings. Therefore, he had to be strong enough. Even if there were thousands of disasters, he could not be weak for a moment. Although it was very cruel, this was reality. If he could not do it, then he could only find someone else. In the inner realm, in the eastern divine land, in the endless mountains, there was someone practicing the sword. Just like 100 years ago, he had nothing and had to start from the very basics. The cold light on the sword reflected off the moon, day after day, year after year. In front of the waterfall, the king stood quietly and looked at the junior practicing the sword. Even though the progress was slow, there was no trace of urgency on his face. Chapter 983. In the Ziwei Galaxy, between the three divine Yangs, above the underworld continent, the Yama kings walked out and looked at the changing starry sky. They thought that after destroying the demon palace, peace would be restored to the human world. They didn't expect an even greater disaster to descend. The 100 races were in chaos and the world was in chaos. Let's part ways here. In front of the divine restriction, Yixuanmiao raised his hand and took off the evil face mask. He looked at the Yama kings and said calmly, in the current situation, it was no longer suitable for the Yama kings of the underworld to appear in the human world. They needed to return to their own path. See you again. The Yama kings took off their masks and revealed familiar faces. They said goodbye to each other and left in different directions. Mistress Mu looked at the woman beside her and was confused. Where are we going? To find your master. Mu Qingxue calmly replied and looked in the direction of the inner world. At the same time, on the divine machine peak, red maples drifted in the wind. Under the fiery red sky, a man, who had knelt for 3 years, slowly stood up. At that moment, above the 9 heavens, blood clouds gathered. An incomparable calamity descended to test the cultivators. A man looked at the sky and clenched her left hand. The purple cloud divine sword hummed and was unsheathed. Light shot into the sky. The exquisite heart and exquisite sword faced the first calamity of the human world. Sword aura filled the air and they were not afraid at all. This is? At that moment, all the fourth realm foreign race cultivators sensed something and looked towards the Shinji Peak. Fourth realm, and it was the aura of a human. Did the human race finally have a fourth realm cultivator? In Jinsei City, on the second floor of the Dawn Moon Chang, the Dawn Moon Tower Master stood in front of the window and looked at the Shinji Peak in the distance. Shinji, your successor did not disappoint you. You can rest assured above the 9 heavens. 100 years ago, the Jiming Marquis from the inner world opened the ancient battlefield and replenished the source energy of the world. 100 years later, the first person to enter the fourth realm was also from the inner world. The people from the Nether King's Pure Land were truly impressive. You reap what you sow. Jiming Marquis' hard work had paid off. In the inner realm, in the divine great land, in a mountain range that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, the white-clothed figure holding the sword was completely isolated from the world. She returned to the mortal world and experienced the origin of the sword. The autumn wind was bleak and the fallen leaves were scattered everywhere. Among the falling autumn leaves, Bai Yi danced with her sword. She was as graceful as a swan, as graceful as a swimming dragon. Her sword hummed softly, and the sound was earth-shattering. In the first year, every slash, and stab was simple but well-practiced. The fallen leaves that filled the sky were sliced apart by the sword without any hesitation. It was a simple sword, simple and unadorned, without any impurities. After removing the burden, the sword returned to its original state. The pure sword looked no different from an ordinary cultivator. Martial for the sake of the sword, the world's sword Tao. Day after day, Bai Yi waved the sword in her hand as if she didn't know fatigue. The sword hummed again and again. It was filled with longing, reminiscence, and gratitude. In front of the waterfall, Prince Yen looked at the dancing sword in front of him quietly. An undetectable gratification flashed in the depths of his eyes. 100 years ago, The Xia kingdom was in danger. That young man picked up his sword to protect the Xia kingdom. Although his sword improved quickly, it was too heavy and mottled. 100 years later, the 100 races were in chaos. The young man of the past had grown up. However, the world was no longer something that a young man could support. The divine prefecture was still the original divine prefecture. However, it now needed a stronger guardian. If he wanted to continue protecting the people he treasured, his sword had to be strong enough to touch the kings and emperors of the 100 races. However, before that, he had to learn to let go of all his burdens. Autumn left and winter came. Snow filled the sky. The waterfall gradually froze, hanging upside down like a mirror. It was mesmerizing. In front of the waterfall, snowflakes swirled in the air. The swordsman's sword was even sharper. His figure was illusory, and his sword chi was like frost. The dancing sword danced in the sky, crisscrossing in the snow. The sword entered the waterfall and cut open many smooth openings. In this year, he learned the intricacies of swordsmanship. Every move was ordinary. In the second year, spring and autumn flew by. Sword chi glowed. Between heaven and earth, the sound of the sword was ear-splitting. It was like thunder, causing people's hearts to tremble. Birds flew into the forest after being startled. The shocking sound of the sword became more and more ear-piercing. The heaven and earth trembled, and the mountains and rivers shook. In the second winter, the sound of the sword gradually stopped. The winter thunder stopped, and the birds and beasts returned to their nests. In the third year, in the fourth year, year after year, time passed so quickly. The sword in the swordsman's hand also became faster and faster. Gradually, it could not be seen clearly. In the 10th year, the swordsman's figure gradually slowed down. Most of his sword chi was also restrained. His sword moves were unpredictable, as if he had forgotten what he had learned in the past 10 years. In front of the waterfall, the green sword in the sword rack beside Prince Yen trembled. It felt the sword in front of it and asked to be unsheathed. Feeling the breath of the green sword, Prince Yen looked away and said calmly, "Wait a little longer. It's not time yet." Hearing this, the green sword gradually stopped its sound and calmed down. In the 13th year, around knowing destiny, the sword moved without a sound. Although the sword moved, it seemed to be hidden between heaven and earth. In the mountains and rivers, there was no other movement except for the sound of the waterfall and the roars of the birds and beasts. In this year, the green sword sounded again, but it was suppressed by Prince Yen again. In the 15th year, it was the season of spring for all things. Everything was unraveled and the waterfall fell with a deafening sound. He was surprised to see a plain dress flashing by. With a swing of the sword, the waterfall went against the flow and rushed to the 9 heavens. In this year, the breath of the sword surrounded the swordsman. It touched his heart, but the swordsman still could not hear it. In the 18th year, another 3 years had passed. The breath of the sword filled the mountains and rivers. The swordsman seemed to have felt it. When he wielded the sword, his eyes were always blank. He could not hear or understand it clearly. Not far away, Prince Yan's face gradually became serious. 100 years ago, he could not hear the breath of the sword because his heart was too chaotic. Now, the opportunity was in front of him again. Whether he could grasp it or not depended on his luck. 1 year, 2 years. From this year onwards, the blank look on Ning Chen's face became more and more obvious. He forgot the past and immersed himself in the sword and the way of the sword. Unknowingly, another 5 years had passed. In the 23rd year, the mountains had changed. Between the mountains and rivers, fierce beasts ran and often appeared. However, no beast dared to approach the waterfall. The breath of the sword in the air became stronger and stronger. It was like a natural barrier, blocking all beasts thousands of feet away. 10 years. Prince Yen looked at the breath of the sword around Ning Chen and his eyes became more and more serious. In the 15th year, he could already feel the breath of the sword. A whole 10 years had passed, but he still could not hear it clearly. Compared to Ah Man, his talent was indeed much lower. However, this was his only chance. If he missed it, his 25 years of hard work would be completely wasted. In terms of cultivation, he lacked too much talent. The only thing he was good at was the sword. If he could not reach the peak of the sword, then in the future, it would be impossible for him to reach the 4th level. In the winter of the 28th year, a white-clothed figure gradually stopped in front of the waterfall. He looked at the waterfall and stood there for the entire winter. Not far away, Prince Yen quietly looked at the young man in front of him and sighed. In the end, talent was indispensable. It had been 13 years. It was really too long. In the distance, the sound of a wheelchair squeaking as it pressed down on a branch could be heard. In the falling snow, a young girl with bright eyes and white teeth appeared. She was sitting in a wheelchair, but her expression was calm and tranquil. She looked like a goddess who had descended to the mortal world. Beside the young girl, a white-clothed figure followed quietly. He had a delicate face and looked like a scholar. His aura was restrained, and no one could sense any aura of a martial artist. In front of the waterfall, Prince Yen sensed the two coming from afar. He looked over and said calmly, "Wait a moment. It has been 28 years. Now that the 100 races are in chaos, the world needs your power to deter the 100 races. I hope you can consider the big picture." In the wheelchair, Peacock looked at the king in front of her and said, "Wait a moment." Prince Yen was not moved at all and said again. Peacock frowned and said, "Sir, 28 years have passed. You should know that this matter has already been decided. Please make a decision." I said, "Wait a moment." In front of the waterfall, Prince Yan's eyes flashed coldly as he said coldly. The king was angry. The wind and snow in the sky suddenly stopped. The entire world became still as if it was frozen. After a while, the wind and snow fell again. The world returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Beside the wheelchair, young Master Xiao Bai's expression turned serious. He reached out and pressed on Peacock's shoulder, stopping her from continuing. "Brother Yen, how much longer do you need?" Young Master Xiao Bai looked at the king in front of him and asked seriously. Prince Yen looked over at the young figure in front of the waterfall. After a while, his eyes showed a hint of emotion and said, 3 months. Young Master Xiao Bai nodded and said, "Then we will wait another 3 months." In the wheelchair, Peacock also looked over and quietly stared at the figure in front of the waterfall. There was no prejudice or abnormality in her beautiful eyes. She understood enough about this person. With the talent of a mortal, he broke through layer after layer of obstacles and stood at the pinnacle of martial arts. This kind of willpower is indeed something that few could reach. She gave him enough respect. However, this did not mean that she approved of him. Talent, effort, and achievements were often not equal. If he did not enter the 4th realm, he would not have the right to stand in this chaotic world. It may be cruel, but this is the reality. In front of the waterfall, young Master Xiao Bai walked forward step by step and stood beside the king. He looked forward and said, "Is this person that important to you?" Prince Yen didn't say anything. However, Wu Yan's attitude already said it all. "Brother Yen, you should know that in this chaotic world of the 100 races, there are many strong people. Every moment of delay will worsen the chaos. Compared to the lives of the world, the gains and losses of one person are sometimes not important." Young Master Xiao Bai said seriously. Prince Yen retracted his gaze and looked at the people beside him. He said calmly, "I do not know about the lives of the world. The reason why I agreed to help you is because you helped the inner realm. However, there are exceptions to everything. This person is that exception. Compared to him, the safety of the world is not worth mentioning." Chapter 984. In the cold night, the moon hung high in the sky. Under the moon, the 4 silhouettes were silent like stone statues. It was so quiet that it made one's heart palpitate. The sword aura in the mountains grew stronger and stronger. Hundreds of beasts prostrated themselves and trembled. The Taoist sword was impermanent. Heaven and earth resonated. The simple sword had an indescribable pressure that shook one's heart. In front of the waterfall, Prince Yen watched quietly and waited. Just like in the past 28 years, he was not impatient at all. Beside him, young Master Xiao Bai's gaze kept wandering between the two. Legend had it that this swordsman of the divine prefecture was a heartless swordsman, but he could not bear to part with the 9th disciple of Mahist. It was hard to understand. Not far away, on the wheelchair, Peacock also looked ahead quietly. Her beautiful eyes did not have any ripples. The 3-month period would soon pass. The chaos of the 100 tribes required the help of this legend of Xia. As for whether the 9th disciple of Mahist could reach the heights of the 100 tribes, it was still unknown. 100 years ago, when the ancient battlefield opened, the origin of heaven and earth was replenished. A group of 4th realm cultivators was destined to appear in the human world. However, there would not be many of them. Who could seize this opportunity would depend on their own luck. A night passed. In the east, the morning sun shone, gradually dispelling the extreme coldness of the night. A breeze blew, and snowflakes flew. In the wind and snow, the white-clothed figure looked at the rising sun in the east. A trace of golden light was reflected in her confused eyes. In an instant, the wind and snow in front of the waterfall were chaotic. Beams of sword chi shot into the sky and rushed up to the 9 levels of heaven. The heavenly path was vast, and there were thousands of paths. The swordsman's sword did not fear ascending the heavenly path. The man and the sword breathed together. The man was fearless, and the sword was fearless. There was only one at the peak. On the wheelchair, Peacock's expression changed. After 28 years, did the king finally succeed in teaching the sword? He succeeded. Beside the king, young Master Xiaobai looked at the sword light in the sky and said, although he wasted a lot of time, it was not easy for him to do it with his talent. I have never looked down on him. As he spoke, Prince Yen walked forward step by step. He looked at the sky and said calmly, "What did you hear?" "A request for battle," Ning Chen said softly. Prince Yen nodded and said, "The way of the sword. From now on, you will enter the palace for the first time." "Senior, thank you for your teachings." Ning Chen turned around and bowed respectfully as he said, "Now, take a good look and understand as much as you can." Prince Yen said calmly. He waved his hand and a green sword flew past the sword rack not far away. Wind and snow fell from the sky. The extreme state descended and red lightning surged. The sword moved, the wind and thunder roared, the green robe wielded the sword, the 10,000 laws wailed, crawling to the extreme. In the extreme realm, Ning Chen looked at the red lightning around him seriously. A serious look flashed in his eyes. He had never seen such a sword realm before. The sword had become one, and it was unique. After over 100 moves, heaven and earth rumbled. Within the extreme realm, the red lightning became more and more dazzling. Wherever the red lightning passed, 10,000 spells collapsed, unable to withstand its might. Clang. With a hum, the green sword returned to its scabbard. Prince Yen waved his hand to disperse the extreme state on the sword. He turned around and looked at the young man behind him. He asked calmly, "How much did you see?" 5%, Ning Chen answered honestly. "It's enough. From today onwards, your sword is not allowed to leave its scabbard for 10 years. "Yes." Ning Chen didn't have any doubts and answered respectfully. "Hey, I'm leaving. The world is so big. You should go out and see." After that, Prince Yen didn't say anything else. He waved his right hand and put away the sword rack. Then he walked forward. Not far away, Peacock, young master, and Little White followed. Soon, they disappeared into the wind and snow. In front of the waterfall, Ning Chen looked at the backs of the 3 in silence. Half a day later, in front of the waterfall, the white-clothed figure left. 28 years of being sealed forever. In the divine great land, 2 beautiful figures walked side by side. They had searched for many years, but they still couldn't find the person they met. Master's wife, could Ning Chen have left the inner world? Looked at the woman beside her and asked. Mu Qingxue stopped and looked at the divine great land in front of them. He said softly, "Maybe. Let's keep looking. If we still can't find him, we'll go to the outer world." Obediently nodded her head and replied. In the Ziwei galaxy, between the 3 divine yang planets, a white-clothed figure appeared. She looked at the divine restriction in front of her and walked in. In the underworld continent, the majestic Yama 10 halls reached into the clouds. Ningchen walked forward and looked at the empty halls. Emotions flashed through his eyes. 28 years. They had indeed left. He walked into the imperial hall. The empty hall was now empty. The Yama kings had left, and the underworld was empty. After the demonic calamity, the 100 races were in chaos. This calamity was no longer something they could control. At least, they couldn't do anything now. After staying for half a day, Ningchen walked out of the underworld. He raised his hand to seal the original planet and then turned to leave. In the various regions of the universe, the 100 races stood in great numbers. Many forbidden lands appeared out of nowhere. In the past 30 years, the 100 races had gradually gained a foothold in the outer world and became the rulers of the universe. The human race was weak. Facing the powerful 100 races, they were completely silent and at a disadvantage. On Shinji Peak, maple leaves fell. Every autumn, the peak would be covered in red. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. However, the beautiful figure on the peak could no longer be seen. Ever since the Fourth Realm calamity descended on Shinji Peak more than 20 years ago, the 100 races had sent people here more than once. However, they all left empty-handed. The first true Fourth Realm human in hundreds of years shocked the 100 races and gave the human race a glimmer of hope. Originally, the arrival of the 100 races had basically destroyed all hope for the human race. The 100 races were too powerful. There were countless Third Realms and many Fourth Realms. There were even king-level cultivators. Such terrifying power made it impossible for the human race to resist. However, just as everyone was in despair, the Fourth Realm calamity descended on Shinji Peak. The first Fourth Realm human cultivator appeared. The world watched, and the panic in their hearts gradually calmed down. Since the first Fourth Realm human cultivator appeared, there would be a second, a third. One day, the human race would be strong enough to fight against the 100 races. In the midst of the Red Phoenix Galaxy, there was a huge spatial crack that stretched for thousands of miles. Cultivators kept appearing from the passage connecting the two regions. Their auras were abnormally powerful, striking fear in others. In the spatial crack, a vast and boundless continent floated. Its territory was more than 1,000,000 miles long. The heavenly demon realm was the true source of chaos. It was also known as the primordial demon realm. In ancient times, it had once led troops to the heavens beyond heaven and brought chaos to the world, bringing great trouble to the 4 immortal realms. During the chaos in the galaxy, the Lord of the Eastern Immortal Realm, the strongest cultivator in the world at that time, personally took action. She went deep into the 100 races formation and forcefully killed all the royal cultivators of the heavenly demons, dealing a heavy blow to the source of the 100 races' chaos. After the heavenly demons were heavily injured, the Queen Mother of the West took action. The Queen Mother of the West cut open the galaxy and buried the passage between the two realms in the heavenly river, cutting off the primordial demon realm's reinforcements. With the two lords of the immortal realms taking action, the chaos of the 100 races gradually subsided. After the efforts of the 4 immortal realms, the remaining 100 races in the human world were gradually wiped out. Today, the 100 races invaded again, but the human world no longer had the protection of the 4 immortal realms. The future was so dark that no one could see the light. Outside the starfield's mist, a figure filled with demonic chi swept over. In an instant he disappeared into the spatial crack. Xian Luo, a member of the heavenly demon royal clan who had once stayed in the human world, had returned to the primordial demon realm today to find his starting point. Not long after Xian Luo entered the spatial crack, a silhouette appeared outside the starfield. She looked at the entrance to the primordial demon realm in front of her. After a moment of silence, she strode in. A frog in a well would never know how high the heavens were. Perhaps he should take a look at the world where the powerful 100 races resided. What was it like? In the spatial tunnel, flowing light flashed. The silhouette disappeared in a flash as she sped forward. After an unknown period of time, a blinding light appeared in front of her. Ning Chen's expression turned serious. He took a step forward and sped up. Walking out of the primordial demon realm, the silhouette saw a boundless wasteland. Beasts galloped and ferocious birds tore through the air. It was as if the primordial era had reappeared, and danger was everywhere. Suddenly, a huge black shadow descended from the heavens. It was so fast that it swooped down in the blink of an eye. A huge eagle tore through the air. It was a divine bird with the bloodline of an ancient wild beast. When it saw the prey below, it did not hesitate and directly swooped down. In the wasteland, Ningchen looked at the huge eagle descending from the sky. His eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and twirled the grass. Sword chi tore through the air. The grass turned into a sword and soared into the sky. In the next moment, a shrill cry resounded through the wasteland. Sword chi slashed across the wings of the huge eagle, and blood spurted out. The huge eagle flapped its wings. However, the blood stimulated the ferocious nature of the bird. It opened its huge mouth and a terrifying suction force came, swallowing the humans below. Cultivation is not easy. Please cherish your life. Ningchen said coldly. Murderous intent exploded from his body. A powerful pressure swept through the entire wasteland. Dust and sand filled the air. The huge eagle's body froze, and fear appeared in its eyes. In an instant, it flapped its wings and quickly flew into the sky. Ningchen did not care about the short interlude. He retracted his gaze and looked into the distance. Light flashed in his eyes. Even though there was still some distance between him and the 100 races, he could still feel the powerful auras coming from the distance. They were as deep and unfathomable as the ocean. Other than wanting to see the true power of the 100 races, there were also two things that he had always been concerned about. These two things were related to the 100 races. One was the origin of the phoenix body, and the other was the origin of the demon body. Most of the power of the demon body came from Xian Luo, and Xian Luo was a member of the heavenly demon clan. It was even very likely that he was a member of the royal clan. Other than the demon body, he also had many doubts about the inheritance of the phoenix body. He had obtained the origin of the phoenix from the 4 extremities. However, whether it was in the inner realm or the outer realm, there were no records of the disappearance of the phoenix. It was said that the 100 races coexisted in the primordial demon realm. He just did not know if the phoenix clan existed among the 100 races. The inheritance of the gods and the cultivation of the secret techniques were very important. Back then, he had been unable to defeat the vermilion bird because it was born with the secret techniques of the vermilion bird clan. His understanding of the origin of the phoenix was limited to the speed of the world. Chapter 985. In the primordial demon realm, the cold moon had just risen. On the wilderness, a white-clothed figure walked slowly. After walking for a day, he still could not make it out. In the night sky, the roars of beasts shook the sky. The dangerous wilderness had always been a forbidden area for women and children of the 100 races. In the distance, the deep roars of beasts sounded. Soon, hundreds of wolves rushed over and surrounded the knowing destiny cultivator. In the wilderness, Ningchen stood quietly and looked at the wolves carefully approaching him. His expression did not change. Behind the pack of wolves, a huge 2-headed wolf stared at the white-clothed figure in the middle of the pack. Its cold eyes were full of fierceness and vigilance. After standing still for a while, Ningchen did not stay any longer and walked directly toward the leader of the wolves. In an instant, hundreds of wolves howled and rushed toward the figure in front of them like a flood. "Be careful!" At this moment, the sound of arrows piercing through the air came from afar. One after another, they shot into the pack of wolves, bringing with them a waterfall of blood. Ningchen stopped and looked in the direction where the arrows came from. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Amidst the explosive sounds of air being torn apart, numerous figures were rushing over. Before long, they were already 1,000 feet away from the group. There were 5 strange-looking men and women. Their appearances and clothes were never seen before. The 2 small horns on their heads showed that they were not humans. When the 5 alien race men and women arrived, a hint of fear appeared in the eyes of the 2-headed wolf. It howled to the sky and turned to run away. The pack of wolves accepted the order, and the team dispersed, running in all directions. "Little brother, are you okay?" The leader of the 5 alien race men and women, a middle-aged man in blue, asked with concern as he looked at the white-clothed young man in front of him. "I'm fine. Thank you for saving me." Ning Chen observed the 5 people in front of him. Alien races were not rare in the outer heavens or the inner world. However, most of the alien races outside the primordial demon realm were hostile to the human race. The 100 races invaded the Empyrean realm to fight for territory and resources. It was not strange that they were hostile. While Ning Chen was observing the 5 people, the 5 alien men and women were also observing the young man in front of them. Judging from the young man's clothes and appearance, he shouldn't be a local. They just didn't know what race he was and where he came from. The 5 non-human race men and women did not suspect that the young man in front of them was a human. In the primitive mystic realm, the human race was the lowest race. They were all enslaved by the king families or the sovereign families. The young man in front of them had an extraordinary aura. He did not look like a slave. As for appearance, there were many races among the 100 races that looked similar to the human race. This was not a rare thing. "Little brother, why are you still wandering around here at this time? There are many ferocious beasts roaming around at night. It's really too dangerous." The middle-aged man in blue spoke again and reminded him. "I got lost and couldn't find my way out." Ning Chen smiled faintly and replied. Beside the middle-aged man, the 4 men and women looked at each other and nodded secretly. It was indeed easy to get lost in the wilderness. This young man did not look like a sinister person. His appearance was born from his heart. The eyes of the person in front of them were clean, making them feel very comfortable. "Little brother, you got lost. How about this? Little brother, you can walk with us. Our village is nearby. We will reach it very quickly," the middle-aged man said gently. Ning Chen was silent for a moment. Then he nodded lightly and said, "Then I will have to trouble you." "Little brother, you are too kind," the middle-aged man replied with a smile. Then he turned around and led the way for the young man. Ning Chen stepped forward to catch up with them, following the 5 of them. Under the night sky, the 6 of them moved faster and faster. The 5 non-human race men and women obviously had some foundation in cultivation. As their figures flashed by, the sound of the air breaking could be heard. Ning Chen followed behind casually. He revealed a bit of his cultivation but did not expose it completely. The middle-aged man in the lead saw that the young man behind him could keep up and did not think much about it. The primitive demon realm valued martial arts. Even normal people would have some cultivation. This was not strange. After half an hour, in the distance, fire burned the sky. Before they even got close, they could already feel the heat waves brought by the fire. Seeing this, Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. Something was not right. As expected, when the 5 of them saw the fire in the distance, their expressions changed drastically. Without a word, they rushed forward. Ning Chen followed behind and also sped up, rushing forward. After 15 minutes, in front of the village, the 6 of them stopped. Looking at the fire in front of them, their faces were filled with shock. The middle-aged man came back to his senses and rushed into the fire like a madman, looking for his wife and daughter. The other 4 also rushed forward without saying anything, each of them rushing towards their own houses. In front of the fire, Ning Chen looked at the burning fire in front of him quietly. In the fire, the 5 non-human race men and women knocked away pieces of firewood, frantically looking for their relatives who might have survived. Help! In the fire, there was a faint cry. It was weak, low, and miserable. It made one shudder. At this moment, in the distance, a group of people wearing red sword robes suddenly appeared. They were chanting spells in the language of the heavens. In an instant, thunder roared from the 9 heavens. Thunder broke through the sky and a heavy rain fell from the sky. As the rain fell, in the burning village, the fire gradually extinguished. The traveler walked over with the Saruo sword on his back. With a slash, the wooden houses where there were survivors were instantly destroyed. The sword light cut open a path for survival and scattered the remaining flames. Human race? Seeing this person, Ningchen squinted his eyes. Was his feeling wrong? This traveler did not seem to be a non-human race. The traveler walked over and bowed to the young man in front of him. Then he walked towards the wooden houses in front of him to save the survivors. Not long after, the other 5 people appeared in black. They could not hide the sadness and depression on their faces. Obviously, they did not find their relatives. In the destroyed wooden house, the traveler looked at the little girl who was burned beyond recognition. He put his palms together and sighed. Then he raised his hand and pointed at the little girl's head, prolonging her life. The swordsman and the traveler's true yuan were like rain, endlessly entering the little girl's body. However, in front of the gates of hell, even Buddha could not defy the heavens. The little girl's life force was still flowing away. What happened? What the hell is going on? The middle-aged man stepped forward, shook the little girl, and asked anxiously. So many soldiers. The little girl opened her eyes, which were full of fear. She only had time to say 4 words before her eyes gradually dimmed. Her life force dissipated, and her soul returned to heaven and earth. The traveler looked helpless. He reached out and touched the little girl's eyes, closing them for her. The middle-aged man was shocked, and the sadness in his eyes grew stronger. Soldiers? How could there be soldiers? The only woman among the 5 people said in a low voice. This is the jurisdiction of King Shuri. If there are soldiers, they must be from Shuri City. Another young man said with a cold expression. King Shuri? The middle-aged man's face changed dramatically when he heard that. He shouted, Don't talk nonsense. Big brother. The young man said anxiously, We can't let go of the revenge of our wife and child. Don't make wild guesses before we find out the truth. The middle-aged man suppressed the sadness in his heart and said in a low voice. King Shuri? Ning Chen's eyes narrowed when he heard this name. In the primal demon realm, the title of king couldn't be used casually. This meant that there was a terrifying king-level powerhouse not far away. He had watched the battle in the inner realm from the side. He had personally experienced how powerful a king-level powerhouse was. It was a power that was difficult to resist. At least, he was far from being able to resist it now. Benefactor, are you a human? Just as Ningchen was thinking, the traveler asked politely. Ningchen heard this, and killing intent flashed through his eyes. A moment later, it disappeared. Grandmaster, why do you ask? Ningchen looked at the traveler in front of him and said calmly. Benefactor, don't worry. I'm from the human race. Seeing that you don't look like someone from a different race, I asked you specifically, the traveler said softly. Ningchen was silent. He didn't deny it, nor did he admit it. Seeing this, the traveler didn't ask any more. In the primal demon realm, the human race was a taboo. Very few people dared to admit their identity as a human, even if they were close friends. We can't waste time here. If Big Brother isn't willing, then I'll go find them for revenge myself. At this moment, the young man among the 5 grabbed a bow and arrow, turned around, and rushed toward the only road outside the village. Stop him! The middle-aged man's expression changed and he quickly shouted. The woman beside him wanted to stop him, but she was pushed away by the man. It was too late for her to stop him. The young man's figure flashed out and rushed forward at high speed. Don't let him die in vain. Come with me to stop him. The middle-aged man got up and immediately chased after him. When the other 3 heard this, they all got up and hurriedly followed him. Benefactor, I'll bid you farewell. See you again. The traveler bowed and didn't delay any longer. He left with his sword on his back. Ningchen returned the greeting. After everyone had left, he glanced at the little girl's corpse in the rain and sighed softly. He reached out his hand and dug out a 4-foot-long grave in the muddy ground. He picked up the little girl and placed her inside. She suffered a lot when she was alive, so he hoped she could be buried in peace after death. After doing this, Ningchen turned around and looked in the direction the 5 people had left. He stepped forward and walked forward. Between the village and Sunrise City, a group of more than 10 people rode quickly. They rushed toward Sunrise City under the cover of the night. In Sunrise City, a pair of cold eyes looked ahead, waiting for the news of the completion of the mission. In the western courtyard of the Monarch City, A handsome young man sat in the courtyard. On the stone table in front of him was a simple and elegant sword in its scabbard. The sword chi was restrained and there was no sharpness to it. In the courtyard, a few pretty maids were kicking embroidered balls back and forth. There was sweat on their fair foreheads. After playing for a long time, they were tired. "Young master, come and play with us." A beautiful maid ran forward, panting. She pulled the young man's arm and shook it. "Sister May, please spare me. I can't play with this." The young man smiled and said, "You guys play. I'll just watch." Chapter 986. Sunrise City was a majestic and huge city. It was guarded by kings and had existed since ancient times. No one dared to invade it. Under the night sky, a group of more than 10 men galloped toward Sunrise City under the cover of the night. The rumbling sound was deafening. Swift like the wind, slow like the forest, aggressive like fire, and immovable like a mountain. Sunrise City's royal cavalry was famous. Anyone who heard of them would be terrified. For thousands of years, Sunrise City's royal cavalry rarely left the city. However, once they set out, they would leave nothing behind. The night was cold and silent. The cavalry galloped, stirring up dust for miles. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the night. Behind them, 5 figures galloped past. Their faces were full of anger and hatred. They rushed out of the dust and chased after the Sunrise City's royal cavalry like crazy. Suddenly, the leader of the royal cavalry, a man in heavy armor and black armor, raised his hand and ordered them to stop. The 12 royal cavalry followed the order. They all reined in their horses and stopped. The leader of the royal cavalry looked back and saw the 5 figures approaching from behind. Murderous intent flashed in his eyes. "Kill!" Without hesitation, the leader of the royal cavalry ordered. Behind them, the 12 royal cavalry went back the way they came and rushed toward the 5 people. The scimitar was unsheathed. Under the moonlight, the 12 royal cavalry met the 5 people in the dust. The scimitar slashed across their throats. In an instant, the wind blew and blood splattered. The 3 people were killed by the scimitar before they could fight back. They were buried forever. The middle-aged man's eyes were about to pop out. He shot out an arrow to avenge them. However, the heavy armor of Sunrise City's royal cavalry was difficult to damage. The arrow flew over and shook violently. In the sparks, the arrow was deflected. It could not hurt the royal cavalry at all. The scimitar slashed again. Blood splattered. The cold light of the scimitar slashed across their throats. In the blink of an eye, 4 of the 5 people were decapitated. The last young man looked at the shocking scene. His body froze. The anger in his eyes gradually turned into fear. He wanted to escape, but his legs were not listening to him. The leader of the royal cavalry rode on his horse and went forward with the scimitar in his hand. The scimitar slashed down to eliminate the source of trouble. Right at this moment, a sword light tore through the sky from afar, and it blocked the curved blade with a clang. The 12 royal cavalrymen of Rising Sun froze at the same time and looked in the direction where the sword light came from. Under the night sky, they saw a traveler in dark red swordsman robe walking over. His calm face showed that he couldn't bear it. In the blink of an eye, he had entered the battle. Benefactors, life is precious. I hope that you can be magnanimous. The pilgrim looked at the leader of the royal cavalry and said, "Sorrow Walker." Seeing the person's attire, the man at the head of the king's cavalry was stunned. Why would this person appear here? Since when did the human tribe dare to meddle in the affairs of the 100 tribes? Saras, you have no right to meddle in the affairs of the Rising Sun Imperial City. One of the 12 Rising Sun Imperial cavalrymen said coldly. The heavens are virtuous. Sunrise Royal City should not be so cruel. Saras sighed softly. Fear flashed in the eyes of the leader of the riders. This person's strength was far above theirs. This was going to be troublesome. The situation changed. The man no longer hesitated. A jade scroll appeared in his hand, and he crushed it immediately. At this moment, in the Rising Sun Imperial City, where there was no night in the extreme daylight world, A majestic voice sounded and spread to the west courtyard. The royal cavalryman's mission is blocked. Go and help them. In the west courtyard, a young man who was watching a few maidservants playing with embroidered balls heard the voice transmission from the royal palace. He looked helpless. His father really couldn't let him rest for a while. Big sisters, please play by yourselves. I'm going out to do something. Yu Yao stood up and said with a smile. He turned around and took the ancient sword on the stone table and walked out of the west courtyard. 300 miles away from the Rising Sun Imperial City, the Rising Sun Imperial Cavalrymen and Saros confronted each other. Their curved blades were glaring. The mission of the Rising Sun Imperial City could not be stopped. In the distance, Su Yi's figure appeared. He stopped 10 miles away and did not move forward. His calm and indifferent eyes did not change in the slightest because of the slaughter in front of him. In this strange land he was just a passerby. He did not care about the grudges between the different races, nor did he want to care. Outside the royal city, Saros and the royal cavalrymen did not retreat. As they were in a stalemate, a young figure walked out from the direction of the royal city. The ancient sword in his hand had a restrained sword aura. After a few breaths, the young figure walked out of the battle. His speed was so fast that it was shocking. Young lord. Seeing the person who came, the 13 royal cavalrymen of Sunrise bowed and greeted him respectfully. Go back and report. Leave this to me. Yu Yao said plainly. Yes. The 13 royal cavalrymen accepted the order respectfully. They reined in their horses and rushed back to the royal city. After the royal cavalrymen left, there were only 3 people left in the battle. Saros looked at the young lord of Sunrise Royal City and waved his hand to send the young man behind him out. Father's order is to eliminate the root of the problem. You can't protect him. Yu Yao said calmly. They are just ordinary citizens. Why is Sunrise Royal City not willing to give them a way out? Saros said with a solemn expression. I don't know the exact reason. If you want to know, you can go to Sunrise City. However, I have to complete the mission given to me by my father. Yu Yao reached out to hold the ancient sword. The moment the ancient sword was unsheathed, the clouds above the 9 heavens surged like waves, shaking the heavens and the earth. Chess Cloud Divine Sword, the peerless divine weapon of Sunrise Royal City, appeared again today. The ancient sword covered the moon and was dazzling. Seeing this, Saros' expression turned serious. He waved his hand and a sword appeared. Saros was unsheathed. The red Buddhist sword's brilliance rose. The 2 swords were dazzling as they faced each other from afar. Rumor has it that Saros' sword had once drawn the blood of a mortal realm practitioner. Today, I will experience it for myself. With a light shout, Yu Yao moved. In an instant, Chess Cloud moved the heavens. The 2 swords instantly clashed. The supreme martial energy collided. The divine sword's brilliance pierced through the clouds. The 2 astonishing divine weapons clashed for the first time. The rumbling shook the world. Although the 2 who were infinitely close to the mortal realm had not officially entered it, with the support of the divine sword, their combat power was no longer inferior to ordinary 4th-level practitioners. The 2 strong forces clashed. In the void, a vision appeared. Amidst the rays of light, the sun rose from the east, and the Saros flowers bloomed. The collision of the 2 great laws shook the sky and the sea, shaking the entire wasteland. As the laws clashed and the Saros flowers bloomed in the sky, a solemn figure appeared. It was a Vajra with angry eyes. With the Buddhist sword in its hand, it slashed at the divine sun in front of it. Seeing this, Yu Yao activated his royal bloodline. In an instant, a 3-legged golden crow appeared in the rising sun. It screeched towards the sky and turned into a stream of fire that crashed into the Vajra figure. With a loud bang, the golden crow and the Vajra collided. An earth-shattering vibration sounded. The wasteland instantly collapsed and collapsed. 300 miles away, Sunrise City's brilliance rose. The Great City Barrier Formation automatically activated and blocked the aftermath of the battle. In the immortal royal city, the brilliance became more and more dazzling. In the palace, a pair of majestic and cold eyes looked at the battle in the distance silently. After a long while, in the palace, a soft sound of surprise sounded. King Shuri's gaze shifted and looked at the plain-clothed figure 10 miles away from the battle. A strange look flashed across his face. Who was this person? He seemed to have never seen him before. In the wasteland, the battle became more and more intense. Sunrise's royal bloodline and human practitioners were fighting. Their techniques had been raised to the peak. The dazzling brilliance made people not dare to look directly at them. Suddenly, in Yu Yao's hand, Bi Yun's sword shone brightly. A vast power rose endlessly. The royal bloodline's secret art appeared for the first time. 3 enlightened graces. Bi Yun waved. In an instant, the royal bloodline power in Yu Yao's body exploded. The unparalleled royal aura descended. The divine sword's power was instantly raised to the limit. The universe turned upside down, and the sun and moon sank. The practitioner blocked the attack with his sword. Blood splashed out, and he took a few steps back. Outside the battle, the sword energy swept past. The young man who was sent out of the battle earlier was instantly beheaded. His blood dyed the wasteland red. Saras looked back. Anger flashed across his eyes. He took a step forward, and the Buddhist sword slashed down. Endless holy light shone. Practitioner will meet again someday. His mission was completed. Yu Yao lost interest in continuing the battle. He slashed with his divine sword, and streaks of sword energy broke through the air. While blocking the holy light, he retreated from the battle. After Sunrise's royal bloodline left, Saras clenched his fists tightly. His anger could not be concealed. In the distance, Ningchen quietly watched this great battle. A moment later, he walked forward. In the wasteland, the figures that passed by each other did not communicate at all. Saras looked at the plain-clothed young man who was walking away. He opened his mouth, but in the end, he did not say anything. After walking 100 steps, Ningchen stopped. With an indifferent expression, he said, "Great Master, this is the world of the 100 races. The human race does not belong here." After saying that, Ningchen did not say anything else, and continued to walk forward. After hearing the former's words, Saras was first startled. Then he fell silent. A hint of confusion flashed across his eyes. The plain-clothed figure slowly walked in the wasteland. Alone, he had put down the heavy burden on his shoulders. Now, as a spectator, he quietly watched everything that was happening around him. He did not interfere, nor did he say anything. When the sun rose from the east, a plain-clothed figure walked in front of the royal city. The moment the city gates opened, he walked into the city. The enormous royal city had been immortal for tens of thousands of years. Until now, it had been countless years. The Sunrise's royal family was famous among the 100 races. Thousands of years ago, there was even an emperor in charge, and he was extremely powerful. However, following the fall of the emperor of the Sunrise clan, the glory of the Sunrise clan became a thing of the past. Although they were still powerful, they could no longer be compared to the royal families of the 100 races. The royal city, the eternal polar day world. The divine sun shone high up in the sky. In the royal city, there was an endless stream of people coming and going. It was extremely lively. Ningchen walked among the pedestrians. Looking at the different races that passed by him, he gradually did not find it strange. The tall beastman was more than 10 meters tall. His fangs were ferocious, causing people to shudder. The exquisite leopard girl had a beautiful face, and her figure was abnormally hot. She wore revealing clothes, causing passers-by to look at her, but no one dared to step forward. The old eagle woman had sharp claws on her hands that were covered in black poison. The passers-by avoided her one after another, afraid that they would hurt the innocent. There were all kinds of races that he had never seen in the past. Now, they were all reflected in his eyes. Ningchen looked at the men and women of various races that passed by him. His calm face revealed a hint of a smile. So, there was a world like this outside of this world. A frog in a well who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Today, he had seen it for himself. Sunrise Palace, Imperial Palace. Ness Yao returned. On the throne in the palace, an illusory figure appeared. Looking at the son of the first wife who was walking over, he calmly said, "Investigate a person." Chapter 987. In front of the throne in King Sunrise's palace, an illusory figure stood in the light. His aura was so powerful that no one dared to look directly at him. Below, Yu Yao entered the palace with a sword in his hand. He looked at the illusory figure in the palace and said calmly, "Father." "Well done." In front of the throne, King Sunrise praised and continued, "Investigate one more person and report back as soon as possible." Hearing this, Yu Yao asked with a strange expression. King Sunrise waved his hand. In the palace, the laws evolved, and a plain-clothed figure appeared. His face and aura were reflected in heaven and earth. Yu Yao looked at the illusory figure in front of him, and a strange expression flashed in his eyes. It's him? When he fought with Saras, this person was watching the battle from afar. So, he was not unfamiliar with this person's face. "Father, why are you interested in this person? Is there anything different about him?" Yu Yao was puzzled and asked. In front of the throne, in the light, King Sunrise nodded slightly and replied, "I suspect that this person is a human." Yu Yao was surprised and said, "A human? Father, do you have any evidence? It has been a long time since a human appeared in Sunrise City." "It's just a suspicion now. Humans are different from other races. Although their lifespan and talent are not as good as ours, their cultivation speed far surpasses that of any other race. The young man just now is not inferior to you. Looking at his age, he should be less than 100 years old. In 100 years, he can peek into the immortal realm. This cultivation is really extraordinary." King Sunrise said seriously. 100 years. Yu Yao narrowed his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he accepted the order and said, "I understand. I will investigate this matter and report it to Father as soon as possible." "Okay, you can leave first." King Sunrise nodded and said calmly, "I'll take my leave." Yu Yao cupped his fists and bowed. Then, he turned and walked out of the palace. Yu Yao left the palace. In front of the throne, the light dissipated, and King Sunrise's figure faded and disappeared. In the western courtyard of the palace, Yu Yao walked over. When the four maids saw him, they were delighted. They immediately stepped forward and bowed. "Young master." "Sisters, please wait a moment. I still have something to do," Ness Yao said with a smile, before walking towards the stone room not far away. The four maids looked at each other, unable to conceal the curiosity in their eyes. What was the young master trying to do? Forbidden grounds of the western courtyard. Gigantic stone rooms stood tall and upright. Ness Yao looked at the 7 stone rooms in front of him. After pondering for a moment, he walked towards the final room. After training for so long, it was time for her to make a move. The stone door opened, and a decadent aura filled the air. What entered his eyes was a room that looked like a palace. It was luxurious, and it was brightly lit. Within the palace, an enchanting and beautiful figure was half lying on the ground. Her delicate body that was like a water snake was covered by a strand of light muslin, and most of her white skin was exposed. She was extremely charming, and it caused others to be unable to move their gazes away. "Hongjin, it's your turn." Ness Yao looked at the lamia in front of him and said, On the red carpet, the woman raised her head and looked at the man in front of her. A smile appeared on her beautiful and seductive face as she said softly, "Sir, don't forget your promise." Ness Yao nodded and calmly said, "As long as you complete your mission, this young master will return your freedom." Hongjin lightly smiled. She stood up from the ground and gently said, "What mission?" "Investigate a person's identity." Ness Yao's expression turned serious and said, "Sunrise Royal City." On the streets, people came and went. Ning Chen walked among them, quietly observing the people around him. Without a doubt, even the commoners of the 100 races possessed combat strength that humans could never hope to match. Although they were not ranked, their innate talents and strength were enough to match up against the human race's postliminary experts. Bang! Suddenly, a violent tremor sounded from afar, followed by deafening cheers. Even though they were extremely far away, they could still be heard clearly. The faces of the people on the streets did not change much, as though they were already used to such situations. Ning Chen's gaze shifted and looked towards the direction where the tremor came from. After pondering for a moment, he walked towards it. The arena, a gigantic ring-shaped building, was bustling with noise. Tens of thousands of spectators were seated on high seats, and in the middle, on a platform made of strange black stones, a tall and sturdy figure was roaring towards the sky. His body, which was more than 30 meters tall, was shining with a strong bronze color, causing people to not dare to approach him. In front of the giant, a black-clothed man stood quietly. His body was surrounded by energy, and facing the giant, his face did not show the slightest hint of fear. At the entrance of the arena, Ning Chen stopped his footsteps. Looking at the rules posted not far away, he paid the spirit stones and then walked in. At the highest point of the arena, at the position furthest away from the arena, Ning Chen stood there. His gaze was focused on the battle below, quietly watching. He did not have much understanding of the 100 Races battle methods. If he were to encounter an opponent in the future, it would be hard to avoid trouble. This arena, to him, was not a bad place. Below, on the arena, the black-clothed man's figure moved, dodging wave after wave of attacks from the giant. He looked to be in a sorry state, but in reality he was very relaxed, and did not show the slightest hint of panic. After attacking for a long time, he was unable to harm the former in the slightest. The giant once again roared towards the sky. Light rose from his body, and his iron fist smashed through the air, smashing down. Beastmen, after all, are beastmen. You have strength, but you don't know how to use it. The black-clothed man sneered coldly. His figure flashed, dodging the giant's fist. Then he took a step forward, stepping on the giant's arm, and leaped up. Close at hand, black energy gathered, and the black-clothed man punched down, landing between the giant's eyes. With a loud bang, the punch, infused with genuine qi, landed between the giant's eyebrows. The giant's face was filled with pain. He took a few steps back and fell to the ground. The black-clothed man landed on the giant's body. His body was filled with black energy, forcefully suppressing the giant. Victory and defeat were clear. The surrounding high platforms were silent at first, but soon burst into cheers, shouting and celebrating for the winner. At the highest point, Ning Chen looked down and squinted his eyes. The difference in strength was too great, so it was difficult to see through the opponent's strength. However, the giant just now was not weaker than a human inborn expert. Without any cultivation, the giant had such strength just by relying on his physical strength. The fighting strength of the giant race was indeed shocking. He just did not know if the giant race also had cultivators. This Black Moon has won 33 battles in a row. It's time for him to lose. Below, in the cheers, a beautiful woman was sitting in the audience. She looked down and said coldly. Beside her, a middle-aged man looked serious and said, "This person's strength is shocking and unfathomable. Every time we arrange a stronger opponent, he can face it calmly. Now, unless White Demon fights, no one can say that they can defeat him." White Demon. Hearing this, the woman's eyes flashed and she said, "White Demon's whereabouts are uncertain. He can't be of any use now. Find someone else." The middle-aged man thought for a moment and nodded, "I'll arrange it as soon as possible." On the arena, after the battle between Black Moon and the giant ended, there were several more battles. The races were all different, and their strength was uneven. The scene was very lively, and the audience was very excited. At the highest point, Ning Chen watched every battle quietly. He had to quickly familiarize himself with the fighting style of each race. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. This was an eternal truth, and it was the same at all times. Hours passed. In the rising sun Imperial City, where there was never night, the people were already used to such a life. In the arena, batches of spectators walked in and out. However, the spectator stands were still filled with cheers. It was very lively. On the highest point of the audience, a silhouette in plain clothes stood quietly. He was inconspicuous, and he stood there for a few days without leaving. "Manager." On the seventh day, in an exquisite room below the arena, a middle-aged man walked in quickly and said, "White demon is back." In the room, the woman put down the wine in her hand and said with a strange expression, "So soon? Arrange for his battle with Black Moon immediately." The middle-aged man bowed respectfully and left. On the arena, a white-haired figure walked out. He held an iron sword, and his murderous aura made people shudder. White demon! On the audience stand, when the audience saw the newcomer, they were first shocked, and then they shouted crazily, "White demon! White demon!" The crazed audience stood up and shouted. Their faces were filled with fanaticism and worship, as if they had seen a god. The scene was shocking. At the highest point of the audience stand, Ningchen squinted his eyes. This person's aura seemed familiar. "Young master, are you alone?" At this moment, a soft and gentle voice came from the side. It made people's bones go soft, and it was hard for them to control themselves. It was a woman in a red dress. Her face was extremely beautiful, and her figure was exquisite. Her white skin was faintly visible, and she was seductive but not vulgar. Ningchen turned around and saw the woman walking over. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Did he attract the attention of others so quickly? "Miss, what's the matter?" Ningchen looked at the woman in front of him and asked calmly. Hong Jin smiled and said, "I don't know much about martial arts. The next battle seems to be an important one. Young master, can you explain it to me?" Ningchen had heard it before. He looked at the woman in front of him and said with a smile, "Judging from your clothes, you shouldn't be an ordinary person. This joke isn't funny at all." Hong Jin laughed lightly, and the seductive look on her face disappeared. "Young master, you have good eyes. I'm Hong Jin, may I know your name?" "Ningchen." "So it's young master Ning." Hong Jin smiled and said, "It's nice to meet you. Young master, you seem to have been standing here for a long time. Do you like to come to this place?" "It's my first time here," Ningchen replied honestly. Hearing this, Hong Jin's eyes flashed and said, "Young master, you seem to be a martial artist as well. I wonder who do you think will win the next battle?" Ningchen looked at the two people standing opposite each other and said calmly, "These two are experts who have hidden their strength. Now it seems that Black Moon's cultivation is slightly stronger. However, the result of a battle has never been decided by the level of cultivation. Based on my intuition, I feel that White Devil has a higher chance of winning." Ningchen didn't say anything else. From just now, he had a feeling that this white demon's aura was familiar. He had only been here for a short time, and he had only met a few people. Therefore, it wasn't hard to guess this person's identity. In addition, there was this woman of unknown origin beside him. The identity of the person who was truly scheming was obvious. As his words fell, several people in the stands in front of the two turned their heads and looked at the plain-clothed young man behind them as if they were looking at a monster. It was rare to see someone so unromantic. There was a beauty by his side, but he didn't care about anything. He just watched the two men fight wholeheartedly. They already didn't know what to say. Hong Jin was also startled when she heard the words of the man beside her. A moment later, she regained her senses and smiled sweetly. She did not say anything to disturb him and quietly accompanied him to watch the battle. Below, in the arena, White Demon was completely suppressed by the Black Divine Moon. Danger surrounded him as he fought back. With a bang, a heavy punch landed on White Demon's body. His figure flew back 100 feet and landed at the edge of the arena, barely managing to stabilize himself. In the stands, the spectators cried out in alarm. They nervously watched the battle below without blinking. "Admit defeat or die." Black Moon looked at the white-clothed figure in front of him and said in a low voice. White Demon looked up and a golden light flashed in his eyes. He exerted force with his feet and with a bang, the remaining force was removed. The array around him violently shook, and talismans were destroyed one after another. It gradually reached its limit. Black Moon sensed this and his expression suddenly changed. Without any explanation, he quickly retreated. Showing off in front of an expert. White Demon raised his hand and a golden divine sun soared into the sky, swallowing Black Moon. In an instant, White Demon's figure flashed by at a shocking speed. Before he could regain his senses, White Demon's fist turned into a palm. With a bang, his palm landed on Black Moon's chest. The heavy palm landed on Black Moon's body and blood splashed out. He was sent flying and crashed into the black stone wall outside the arena. His clothes were torn apart and he was in a miserable state. It was an unbelievable reversal. With just one move, the battle was over. In front of an absolute difference in strength, all battle tactics were useless. At the top of the arena, Ning Chen quietly watched the battle below. A strange light flashed in his eyes. Now, he was even more certain of White Demon's identity. White Demon actually won. Young Master Ning is indeed powerful, Hong Jin said with a soft smile. Ning Chen smiled. Suddenly, his expression turned serious as he looked at the arena below. On the arena, White Demon looked up and a provocative light flashed in his eyes. He said indifferently, "You've been watching for so long. Come down and fight." The casual voice was so clear that it spread throughout the entire martial arts arena. Everyone was stunned as they followed White Demon's gaze. At the top of the arena, a white-clothed figure stood quietly. His white hair fluttered in the wind. Although his face was young, there was an indescribable sense of age, as if he had experienced countless hardships. Below the arena, a beautiful woman who was calmly watching the battle frowned slightly. She put down the wine cup in her hand and said, "Go and see what happened." The middle-aged man bowed respectfully and retreated. Not long after, the middle-aged man returned and said with a serious expression, "Manager, White Demon is provoking someone. The target is very unfamiliar and doesn't seem to be a regular of our arena." Strange. The beautiful woman stood up and walked towards the arena. She knew White Demon's character. Every time he came, he would immediately leave after accepting a few challenges. He never spoke much and did not care about anything. Today was a little strange. The arena was unusually quiet. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the arena, waiting for the result. Under everyone's gaze, a smile gradually appeared on Ning Chen's face. He nodded and said, "Okay." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly tapped his foot and the white-clothed figure flew down from the sky. His movement technique was graceful, like a fairy. Above, Hong Jin looked at the former's back and her eyes were full of splendor. She also wanted to see what the young man who would decide her future was capable of. In the arena, seeing that the white-clothed young man had accepted the challenge, everyone cheered loudly and encouraged him. Immediately investigate this person's identity. Below the arena, the beautiful woman looked at the white-clothed figure on the arena and said seriously. The middle-aged man accepted the order and quickly left. "Please." On the arena, Ning Chen raised his hand and calmly said to the white-clothed man opposite him, "I won't say nonsense like 'I'll let you have one sword.'" Then, White Demon clenched his right hand and the sword on the stone wall in the distance trembled and turned into a streak of light that flew over. White Demon grasped the sword and his aura instantly changed. His sharp sword intense soared into the sky and shook the entire arena. "Sir, where is your weapon? Take it out." White Demon looked at the person in front of him and said seriously, "Sorry, I can't use it for now." Ning Chen revealed an apologetic expression. His true chi rose and snow fell from the sky. An abnormally powerful energy constantly shook the arena, shocking everyone. Peak of the third realm. Below the arena, the beautiful woman's expression changed slightly when she felt the former's pressure. An expert close to the red dust realm, this young man actually had such a powerful cultivation. The promise of 10 years could not be violated. Facing White Demon, who was hiding his identity, Ning Chen did not suppress his cultivation. Since the young master of the royal city had already sent people to investigate him, then hiding his cultivation would show that he had ulterior motives. Besides, it would be interesting if he could force the young master of the royal city to reveal his identity. After a moment of confrontation, the two figures moved at the same time. Knowing each other's abilities, both of them attacked with earth-shattering power. the 9 heavens star-picking hand appeared again. Starlight shone brightly and collided with the royal city's sword. After 10 moves, both of them were shocked. White Demon took in Yuan and raised his true chi by 30%. A golden divine sun rose into the sky and devoured the world. The royal city's secret technique appeared again. Although White Demon deliberately hid his aura, it still attracted many suspicious gazes. The art of the rising sun, heavenly sun, could only be used by the royal family's direct descendants and a few trusted aides. This was a well-known fact. Now that the royal family's secret technique appeared in White Demon's hands, if he did not steal it, then this person must be related to the rising sun royal family. Under the divine sun realm, White Demon's speed and strength increased by several times. His every move was shocking. It was the first time that Ning Chen faced a foreign race expert of the same level, so he did not dare to be careless. He took in Yuan and Qi and moved his body. He used the Qilin's secret technique to the limit to meet the royal city's secret technique. Star plucking and heavenly sun were martial arts that were diametrically opposed. As they clashed, the Dharma idols sank and the world shook. On the arena, all the arrays were activated and countless runes rose. However, facing the impact of the battle between 2 experts close to the red dust realm, dozens of arrays began to collapse, unable to withstand the power of the 2. In the stands, tens of thousands of spectators saw this and immediately panicked. Below the arena, the beautiful woman who was in charge of the arena changed her expression slightly. She did not dare to delay any longer and said in a deep voice, "Attack!" As soon as she said this, 4 black-robed old men appeared in the arena. They activated their half-step red dust realm cultivation and worked together to protect the array, blocking the aftermath of the battle between the 2. The 4 experts of the arena took action. In the stands, the panicked spectators gradually calmed down. They looked at the battle below with excitement and a trace of fear. Burning sun. Star-plucking divine sun. Ning Chen shouted and his figure flew out. It was difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake. White Demon focused and gathered the power of the divine sun on his iron sword. The golden brilliance was dazzling. The sword slashed down and broke the afterimages. However, a white-robed figure appeared behind him out of thin air and slammed down with a heavy palm. With a rumble, the air billowed. In the aftermath of the shock, White Demon blocked the burning sun palm with his iron sword and was in danger. At the same time, in King Shuri's palace, rays of light gathered and the majestic king appeared. He looked at the arena in the distance and raised his hand to the sky. The next moment, the shocking palm power passed through layers of space and appeared in the sky above the arena. Under the shocked gazes of countless people, it fell from the sky. In the arena, Ning Chen felt it and looked at the sky with a solemn expression. The 5 scrolls were opened. The life scroll was the origin, and the heaven, earth, nothingness, and spirit scrolls were combined. He activated the star-plucking technique and broke through the sky. Chapter 989. In Sunrise Royal City, the king made his move. The power of his palm pierced through the air, and the forceful power passed through the space restriction and reached the arena in the distance. The shocking palm with unparalleled power drew a dazzling blood mark in the sky. Everyone's shocked gaze swept towards the arena. In the arena, a terrifying pressure descended. In the stands, all the spectators were shocked, and their faces were filled with fear. In the arena below, wind and snow rolled. In the huge whirlpool, 5 scrolls were opened. The life scroll was the foundation, and the godless heaven and earth scroll activated the power of picking stars. The palm broke through the air and met the king's attack. In the sky, picking stars shook the rising sun. In the shocking collision, the wind and clouds changed color. Endless aftershocks roared and surged, spreading thousands of miles away. In the royal city, the people were shocked. They immediately prostrated on the ground and trembled. Below the arena, in the arena, the white-clothed figure's legs sank 3 inches into the ground, but she forcefully received the king's attack. Her peerless ability was shocking. After the attack, the wind and clouds in the sky gradually dispersed. The king's power did not descend again, and everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Ning Chen looked at the sky, suppressing the surging blood in his body. A hint of seriousness flashed across his eyes. The king's power was indeed abnormally terrifying. He already had to deal with the attack from such a distance. If King Sunrise came personally, it would be really troublesome. In the arena, White Demon waved his hand and kept his sword. He looked at the young man in front of him, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. Hong Jin, Yu Yao, the distinguished guest of the royal city, do not neglect him. At this moment, in the sky above the arena, King Sunrise's voice sounded calmly. Yes. At the highest point of the arena, Hong Jin bowed respectfully and replied. In the arena, White Demon also bowed and received the king's order. In the next moment, golden light rose around White Demon's body. The disguise disappeared, and an extraordinarily handsome young man with the bee cloud in his hand entered everyone's eyes. Young Lord Yu Yao. In the arena, tens of thousands of spectators were shocked when they saw this. A moment later, they regained their senses and immediately stood up to bow. The young lord of Sunrise Royal City came personally. In the arena, everyone knelt down and did not dare to cross him. On the opposite side, Ning Chen looked at the person in front of him and narrowed his eyes. Gradually, a smile appeared on his face as he said, I didn't think that the young master would take the initiative to reveal his identity. Your distinguished self-strength is extraordinary, and this young patriarch does not have the confidence to continue hiding my identity. Counting the previous time, this should be the second time we meet. Nice to meet you. Ness Yao looked at the former and said with a smile. Young master is too polite. Ning Chen returned the greeting and said with a light smile, the lady above must be one of young master's people. This gift is too valuable. Young master should take it back. So you've already seen through it, sir. A strange glint flashed past Ness Yao's eyes. This person's eyesight was truly astonishing, and he was a difficult opponent to deal with. Following this, he had to carefully deal with him. Thinking up to this point, Yu Yao looked towards the highest point of the arena. With a gentle smile on his face, he said, Hong Jin was indeed a member of King Shuri's manor in the past. However, she is now a free person, so this young lord can no longer interfere with her choice. When Ning Chen heard this, his eyes narrowed. He would be a fool if he believed this. At the highest point of the arena, Hong Jin took a step forward. Her red dress fluttered as she descended from the sky. She looked like a fairy who had descended from the heavens. Her beauty was enchanting. Young Master Ning. Hong Jin stepped forward and bowed towards the two of them. Ning Chen chuckled. Looking at the lady in front of him, he said, Miss, you're free now. This is what your young master said in front of this one, so I believe it still counts. When Hong Jin heard this, her expression shook. A moment later, she calmed herself down and bowed. She softly said, Thank you, young master. Thank you, young Master Ning. Yu Yao looked at the person in front of him, and a ray of light flashed past his eyes. This Mr. Ning was really good at scheming. This time, even if Hong Jin couldn't complete her mission, he couldn't restrict her freedom anymore. This isn't the place to talk. I believe this must be the first time Brother Ning has come to Sunrise Royal City. Why don't I be the host and find a place to have a drink? Ness Yao glanced at the quiet martial arena and said. Ning Chen pondered for a moment, nodded lightly, and said, Then I'll have to trouble young master. Under the gazes of the crowd, the two of them walked out of the arena. Behind them, Hong Jin followed quietly. After the three of them left, the tens of thousands of spectators in the arena finally regained their senses. They looked at each other, and their eyes were filled with shock. Intoxicated Fragrance Inn, the largest brothel in the royal city. Yu Yao brought the two of them over. In front of the inn, a strange look flashed past Hong Jin's face. She didn't expect that the young master would bring her and young Master Ning to a place like this. Ning Chen looked forward and revealed a playful smile. The choice of the Shuri Royal City's young master was rather unique. The three of them entered Intoxicated Fragrance Inn. Immediately, several scantily clad beautiful ladies came forward to welcome them. Two women with shocking cultivations were fighting against two experts below the secular realm alone, and they were actually not at a disadvantage at all. Their strength was shocking. After exchanging 3 blows, the surrounding restaurants were constantly collapsing. Countless men and women revealed panicked expressions, and before they could even shout out, they were sent flying by the wind and snow. Inside the drunken fragrance inn, the wind and snow frantically swirled, turning into a barrier that enveloped the 4 of them. While blocking off the aftershocks, it also prevented the number of casualties from increasing. Young Master Yu Yao, this time, you'll owe me a favor. Ning Chun once again pushed away the woman in front of him with a flip of his palm. His gaze swept towards the young master of Rising Sun Royal City who was similarly in a tough battle, and he said, "Aiding the tyrant, you deserve to die 10,000 times." On the other side, the killing intent on Xia Ji's face grew even denser. Her body poured down like a waterfall, splitting the universe apart. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.